Testing, testing. Testing.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I could ask members of the public to take their seats, we'll start the meeting in 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans 1 minute. Matt? Yep. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Finance and Economic Development Committee. Declarations of interest, déclaration de conflit d'intérêt, confirmation of minutes For the 10th of July, 2019, carried. Communications as presented. Waiver required to add the following items on the agenda. Verbal update, Women and Gender Equity Liaison. Open City Network Council appointment. Rideau Corridor Landscape Strategy. And response to inquiry OCC 1419. So on the waiver, carried by Councillor Dudas. On the motion, carried. I'll go through the consent agenda. If anyone would like to speak to any item that's on the agenda, if they could just sign up under the screen with Joelle over there. I'll be happy to hear from you. First item is presentation, Confederation Line update. Second item is a presentation on Stage 2 LRT. Third is on the Ottawa Stadium update. On consent agenda, if acceptable, 2019 operating and capital budget Q2 status report. Carried. Item 5, proposed budget directions. We have a presentation. We'll come back to that. Item 6, capital budget adjustment and closing of project, city tax, and rate supported. A motion? Okay, so we'll, is it a technical, Councillor? Okay, do you want to do it now and we can free up some finance staff?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas Project 907423 Meadow Breeze Park Expansion and Project 905842 Romina Park Expansion are included in the list of capital projects recommended for closure, document 1 of the capital budget adjustments and closing projects recommended for closure report. And whereas these two parks are in high density, newer areas of the ward that are still growing, whereas there is space in both existing parks to accommodate additional park elements, equipment, and features, and whereas these projects should not be closed at this time in order to provide an opportunity to introduce additional features to accommodate park usage and growth in these areas, therefore be it resolved that document 1 titled Capital Projects Recommended for Closure be amended to remove Project 907423 and Project 905842 from the list of capital projects recommended for closure. Mr. Mayor, the money that's left, we're just adding additional benches and some shade into the parks. That's all that is.
Okay. Councillor Blais, did you have a question? No. Okay, are staff comfortable with that motion? Mr. Kanalakis, okay. On the motion, carried. On the report as amended, carried. Item number 7, status update, FEDCO inquiries and motions. Received. Item 8, legal services, service juridique. Sorry, on, well, we have it later on the agenda. Comprehensive legal services report for the period January 1st to June 30th. Received. Excuse me, corporate real estate office, item 9, designate 14,878 square feet at 141 Laurier Avenue West as municipal capital facility. Carried. That's the LRT office. Item 10, designate 8,718 square feet at 580 Terry Fox Drive as a municipal capital facility. Carried. Item 11, delegation of authority, acquisition and sale of land and property, January 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2019. Délégation de pouvoir, acquisition et vente de terrain et de propriété de 1er janvier au 30 juin 2019. Received. Economic development and long-range planning, développement économique, 2018 business improvement area annual reports. Received. Item 13, propose a process for 2019-22 term of council priorities. We have a presentation, so we'll come back to that. And information previously sent around, and that's it. So we'll go to our first item, which is the Confederation Line update. Obviously a very exciting time in our city as we start the countdown towards Saturday and the service of the LRT. And Mr. Manconi and his team have been burning the midnight oil, making sure everything is ready for Saturday. And we thank you for all of your years of hard work on this, John. This has been probably the most challenging file you've ever had as a public servant, and we appreciate both your competency as well as your patience in dealing with this complex project that is a true city building project. So the floor is yours, and I believe we have a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Merci. The first presentation is on stage 1, and then we'll take questions. Then I'll turn over to Mr. Morgan for stage 2, and we'll take questions on that. So, Mr. Mayor, members of committee, members of council, 4 days until the biggest milestone in Ottawa's transit history, the first bus rapid transit to light rail transit system conversion in the world, the busiest LRT line on opening day in North America. So many firsts, and locally everyone is watching. The transit and the transportation world is watching us also from across North America and worldwide. So nearly a decade of hard work, planning, consulting, designing, constructing, and testing will become a reality this Saturday. And staff from our team across the city, all the departments, Rideau Transit Group and Rideau Transit Maintenance are working literally 24/7, ensuring that the Confederation line is ready for our customers in our great city. We've been running many drills over the last number of days and weeks leading up to launch. That's just a small taste of some of the drills that we've been doing, and that's to ensure that we're ready for anything that comes our way. And this is what the best practices do. Everything from biohazards to evacuations, smoke on the train, and so forth. So a long list of rehearsals and drills and lessons learned and documentation and involvement from many people. The drills include all our staff, our operators, our controllers, our supervisors, special constables, customer service, and emergency protective services, fire, police, paramedics, and I want to thank them. They've been together with us on this journey. And that's, again, ensuring that we're ready for any event. We had a dress rehearsal on Saturday. I want to thank all of the city partners, city departments, the GMs, volunteered staff from their organizations, and the rehearsal went really well. It did a couple of things. People were given specific assignments so we could test not just the systems, but also the staff. So, you know, we even had a lost child scenario. We had people trying to ensure that all the systems work. And equally important is a fresh set of eyes that come back and give us observations and logs and so forth. So it was a very good process for us. We also held a lot of tours for many stakeholders. That's a small sampling of the list. These folks were very appreciative. And again, a fresh set of eyes through their lenses and through an integrated community, holistic, bringing everybody from the city in, because that system is for everyone, built with the latest and the greatest features, one of the most accessible systems in North America that you've invested in. And we've spared no expense to ensure that it's all inclusive, safe, and accessible for everyone. Customer outreach, we're doing a lot of things to ensure that our number one priority is clearly focused and attended to, and that's our customers. There's a lot of change coming for everyone. So signs at bus stops and stations, I'm sure you've seen those. Messaging through all our various channels. The mail-outs, very important. We started those last Friday. Every single household in the city will receive one. And then a second mail-out occurs the week of September 23rd. That's to take them through the journey of the changes. The red vests, many of you have commented about the visibility of the red vests, both at your councillor meetings, but also out on the system, and not just the train stations, they're at key transfer points and so forth. We're working on a very concerted effort to ensure that all the stations and the amenities have a deep clean so that they're ready for our customers. That's occurring all this week, and that's ensuring that everything is up to standard. On Saturday, there is a media event and the ceremonial ride. It's going to mark the opening of the line, and it starts at Tunney's Pasture. There'll be formal remarks by all 3 levels of our funding partners and representations from the Indigenous leaders, who of course play a critical part in this project. And then guests will be invited to board the train for the inaugural ride. Public opening is at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Lots of questions on that. There's a lot of thought that's been given to that. There is staging that needs to occur and so forth in terms of opening up sequentially and everything else. We'll have red vest staff all over the place, flooding the system to ensure that we're there to assist anyone. And then from 2:30 to 4:30 at all the stations along the line, councillors are doing special events with local musicians, art representatives to discuss the fantastic works of arts that are in the stations. So that's something that we're very proud of, and thank you to all the councillors that have participated in that. So key dates for customers, all of this is out there. You've heard it many times. This becomes a question of repeating it, and making sure that we can support everyone. We have the 3 weeks of parallel bus service. That will remain in place. On Sunday, October the 6th, your bus network undergoes major changes to align with the Confederation line, and the bus service gets peeled off. It's removed. Customers, if they're asking you, where do I go for information, octranspo.com is your first best bet on planning out your route. Remembering that while some people may want to try to take in all of the changes, what is important for the commuter is their commute. And in the many sessions we've had and the feedback, when you see the people, the red vests at the stations, it's all about that. Every one of those members have been trained. They have pocketbooks with every single route, so they can not only just talk to the customers, but also show them their route changes and so forth. Checked mailboxes is another reminder to our residents, and if you can do that through your channels, that's also helpful. And then the second notice is coming through also on the 23rd. On the 14th, there will be some changes. So the bus service at Blair will be adjusted to serve the new bus platforms. And yes, it has been stress tested, as you know. If you recollect, we did that a few months ago. Westbound, the bus stops at Albert and Bayview are going to be moved to adjacent to the station plaza. Again, this is a lot of information. It's relevant to those people that use it, and they've been adjusting their plans accordingly. The entrance to Saint Laurent station from Tremblay will reopen. That's important. And the fare paid zones at Tunney's, Herdman, Blair, and Bayview come into effect. And then service adjustments for the routes that are listed at the bottom of the slide. Then we move into service integration and the expansion. So everything's mapped out in terms of what we have to do. We have to remove the detours for the East End councillors. You'll be happy to know we are pushing MTO very hard that the first one that needs to come off is the 417 connection. I know you've waited long and hard for that one there. We've prioritized it accordingly. Then the Lees Avenue one. And then there is work that RTG has to do, the Nicholas Street area, the realignment of the bus lanes on Laurier. I know Councillor Fleury's been asking about that one. The removal of the eastbound and overhead bus lanes on Scott Street. I know Councillor Leeper's been asking about that, so we briefed him on that. And then the Albert Street and Booth Street adjustments accordingly. Also, we have to do some signage changes on 174. I can assure members of committee and councillors that Mr. Landry and his team are the quarterbacks on all the traffic logistics. We're not doing anything in isolated. It's all an integrated system, all integrated mobilities, and it's all users. It's cars, automobiles, trucks, cyclists, pedestrians, and so forth. And yes, we've had a few glitches. I know we did something that buggered up Councillor Harder and Councillor Brockington's area, but we moved quickly to adjust that with their support. So it's an integrated transportation system, and we're doing that accordingly. Then on October 6th, this is when your investment kicks in of the $5 million. I know many councillors have been asking about that, so it's literally around the corner. Over 100 routes will be adjusted. The bus volume on Albert and Slater, one of the dividends of your investment, will reduce significantly, and then you'll have better, faster connections with the investments that you've also made. and there's some renumbering of routes. And again, we're providing information through various channels. We will remain in place until late October, and we've built the plans so that our support staff can stay longer if they need to. So we're literally monitoring it day by day. So lastly, look for the red vests out there. They're your best friend. They can help you out if you have any question on any matter, not just the service. Thank you. Be happy to take any questions.
Great. So we have one member of the public that would like to speak to this item before we get to councillors' questions and comments. Alex Cullen. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, last Wednesday I had the privilege of riding the system as a representative of the Council on Aging. I was accompanied by members of the accessibility community. OC Transpo had organized this. We were to test the train, look at a couple of stations, and I want to tell you that this is going to be a very exciting event. I've been looking forward to this happening. We assembled at the William Street entrance to Rideau Station. That's a deep station. You take 4 escalators to get down there. I can tell you that the station itself is airy, is well lit, is dry. Just want to underline that little element. We checked out the gates, we checked out the fare payments, we checked out the signage. Very impressive. The art as well. We took the train. This is Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, Mr. Mayor. Some of you may recognize the timing because apparently the night before there was some incident that the media covered. But the system was running at 1 o'clock Wednesday afternoon. We took the train out to Herdman Station, which is a fare paid zone, whatever the phrase is. We're shown how the system was going to work there, the signage for picking up the buses. We took the train back to Plimsy, very nice station, good pedestrian access. My colleagues that were testing the system, that was our job, to experience the system. The train ride smooth, good room. We had some minor suggestions, but they were minor, part of the teething process. But overall, it was a very good experience. So I just wanted to let you know that some of you have already been on the system and already know this already. One thing I did discover in talking to OC Transpo staff, that the weekend is not going to be free. And I think that's a marketing misstep that this council should correct downstream. I remember when the Montreal Metro opened. I was a teenager in Montreal at the time. It was free that first weekend. Thousands used that system. We looked at all the stations because it was sold as every station was individually designed, and it was proved to be an instant success. Lord knows this city needs a bump up in transit ridership. Here is a marketing opportunity, particularly on a weekend when the demand on the system is low, and you have the opportunity to not only come out and test what you're going to deal with on Monday with rush hour, but you have the opportunity to bring your family out, your friends out, and just look at this modern, new facility that, quite frankly, will be one of the jewels of this town. So I want to leave that with you. I suspect there's some work behind the scenes on this already. I would have preferred seeing it for this weekend. Please consider that for the future because, as you all know, marketing this system is the first stage of a multi-stage system. Stage 2 will make it very clear to the residents of Ottawa what value this investment is. Stage 1 is only 14 kilometers, and as you all know, there's going to be some disruption as we transition over. So the more that we can show people the potential of the system, the more we're going to attract riders. So please consider in the future a fare-free weekend to entice the residents out. And that's my message today, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation? To the delegation? Go ahead, Councillor Moffat.
Mr. Cullen, I just wanted to thank you for your exchange with the Green Party member from Cape Breton-Canso. I was listening on the radio to that, and I thought you did a great job clarifying some of the misconceptions that certain Green Party candidate from Cape Breton-Canso had about our line here in Ottawa. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Councillor.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Next, questions. We have Councillor Hubley, please, on the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Manconi and Mr. Morgan and their team for all their work that they've done on this project. I've had the honor and privilege to be a part of the process with them and to see what they're doing and witness what our residents are about to get to see for themselves this weekend. And so if you don't mind, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank them here at VETCO for their work and reassure residents that, you know, Mr. Manconi and I were down there Sunday morning watching some of the testing of the system that was going on, and they are thinking about every possible scenario and testing for it to make sure that we have plans in place should, and eventually some things are going to happen that are going to impact the system, and it gives me great confidence to know that these issues have been tested and there's plans in place for when something happens to ensure, as OC Transport has done for decades in this city, ensure that people can get to where they're going on public transportation no matter what the issue is that comes up. So thank you, Mr. Manconi and Mr. Morgan.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I just want to concur with Councillor Hubley. I want to give my thanks to staff as well. I mean, we're finally here, and you know, thanks aren't good enough at this time, but I hope Council has an opportunity at some point in the autumn to recognize, you know, all the hands that went into this from start to finish. It really is quite a feat. I've talked about sort of the emergency process for over a year now because I really want people who ride the system to really understand, in the unlikely event that something happens, what they are supposed to do throughout that process. Can you just describe what the average station looks like as far as providing information to riders should something happen, not just evacuation signage, but how to leave the station and also how to get to that bus stop nearby that will provide the replacement service?
Yes, no, that's a great question. So the number one message is if there's an evacuation, you look for the evacuation signs, the exit signs, which are, when you see the stations, are clearly marked. But the multiple sources of information that go to customers is the following. Number one, station announcements, which get controlled from the control center, which has full visibility and full SCADA of every station. The scenario that Chair Hubley was talking about on the weekend, we simulated a train that had 3 injuries, had to do an evacuation, had to get someone who was in a wheelchair out and evacuate all customers. So there's the audibles, there's the alarms, there's also what is the most important thing, and that's staff at the platforms telling people what to do, especially if you know, there's smoke or there's any incidents like that. But what's also equally important on top of all that is the critical infrastructure. So on the weekend, we tested we tested the exhaust fans, which we simulated smoke, and what you want to do is draw that smoke away from your platforms. You always pull it away. So we have that. On top of all of that, we also have some of the best SCADA control systems in the industry for our fire department. One of the councillors was asking me, why are all the fire trucks moving up to the stations, getting out with a set of keys? Those are the fire platoons going to every single station, and you'll see an electronic board at the top. That's their SCADA on top, so they can do their command posts there rather than having to go down to the station and so forth. We're integrated with all the emergency protective services folks, and I want to thank Tony DeMonte, Pierre, and all the chiefs. They've been phenomenal. Their teams are embedded right with our designers, and they've been instrumental in addressing exactly what you're speaking about, Councillor.
It's my understanding that there'd be 2 direct mailed pieces of literature going to every home in the city. One is generic citywide, and the other would be neighborhood specific to a homeowner to talk about, I guess, bus route changes and their local LRT station. I haven't received anything yet, so when are those expected to be mailed?
We had confirmation from our supplier in Canada Post. We started mail-outs on Friday, and that's because we wanted to ensure that everybody got it no later than this Friday. So it's supposed to occur all through this week.
A few weeks ago, there were noise issues identified in Kitchissippi Ward. I'm not sure what the update is on that as far as mitigating noise along the rails. Have any other communities raised noise-related issues?
Yes, Councillor Cloutier has an issue with bells from the trains in the yard that we're working with him and his community. And we're mapping out a series of actions. We have the end solution. It's just the interim that we got to work with our teams.
And just my last question, you and I have met to talk about a number of things, but also certainly acknowledging the challenges that the people of Ottawa have gone through the last few years, the fact that we're behind, we're finally rolling out this weekend. But as the delegate indicated, I see great value in having an opportunity to really target the system to the non-daily rider, to get people who don't use public transit at all or the occasional rider, and within the first month have an opportunity, a free day where we really market the system to those people. The ultimate goal is to attract more riders to LRT than are using the buses now. So can you provide an update on where we are with respect to a free day in the next 4 to 6 weeks?
Yes, Councillor, and for other members of the committee, I had a very good discussion with Councillor Brockington on, I like where he went. He moved us away from a free day on the weekend, and it's not because we don't want to do it. It's just there's so many challenges on the weekend, and we're concerned with inundating the system and so forth on top of all the changes. So where Councillor Brockington went to is there a possibility of doing a free Sunday sometime in the fall? I shared that with Chair Hubley and the Mayor. They're both very supportive. We think it's a very good idea. It's on the to-do list. I don't have a date for you. We're going to come back to Transit Commission and talk through that, but I do want to thank the councillor. It was a good idea, and I know Chair Hubley and the Mayor were very supportive, and I'm sure we'd get support around the table for that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. I was at street parties all weekend. People are excited. They're getting ready to ride the train. It's going to be an exciting opening. I do have to ask, so what is the update on the noise issue that we're experiencing through that portion to the east of Parkdale Avenue? I don't think that the rail grinding has been done yet. When can we expect that, and what are the next steps to be taken on that issue?
So the rail grinding there's two mitigations. The first one is rail grinding of the rails in that particular area. Rail grinding is actually going to take place across the entire line, so we'll see.
And I'm really sorry, it's difficult to hear back here. I'm just wondering, I think I had spoken to some of the mayor's staff in the previous FEDCO meeting. We have a hard time hearing at this back table, and I'm wondering whether the meetings can be held in council chambers moving forward. But if I can just ask you to start over, because it is difficult to hear.
Sure. So the noise mitigation in that particular area is really a two-step process. The first step in the process is the rail grinding. The rail grinding, we spoke to RTG last night, and they're going to start rail grinding this week is their plan. So look for that activity. There'll be some equipment on the line overnight. We haven't experienced in that particular area that machine on that location, but we have used that machine on the Trillium line in the past, and so we've got some comfort that it won't be too disruptive running that piece of equipment. So that's kind of the first mitigation. We're going to start in the Parkdale area near that one location that's been problematic, but actually we're going to do the entire line. So there will be some benefit with that rail grinding across the entire system. The second thing is really the installation of rail dampers in that particular section of the rock cut. It has a unique configuration due to the vertical clearance limitations. We're going to install rail dampers on the rail in that area, so we've gotten the go-ahead to do that. We're doing some final analysis on the type of rail dampers and kind of the number that we need to make sure that we maximize the noise reduction in that area. That work is probably 12 to 14 weeks out in terms of being able to install those dampers. So the rail grinding should start this week. As of last night, RTG said it was starting. And then the rail dampers is still a little ways out.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether you want me to hold the next question for the next update on stage 2, but what lessons are learned with respect to the noise in stage 1 that we'll be applying to stage 2 to make sure that noise doesn't repeat itself through the length of that trench?
So, Mr. Mayor, we have that same configuration between Tunney's and Dominion, so the same issue with a rock cut, limited vertical clearance, and so, based on our experience with the dampers, between Bayview and Tunney's, we're going to install those same dampers between Tunney's and Dominion to make sure that the noise in that area is reduced. We've looked across the rest of the system. That configuration is unique to that area. It doesn't exist elsewhere. Elsewhere it's ballast with ties, and so we haven't seen noise issues to the same extent as we've seen in the rock cut area in other locations. So once we have the feedback and the results of the dampers in this first section of stage 1, we'll then issue a variation to the contractor to install those same dampers for the Tunney's to Dominion section of track in stage 2.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you. We had a lot of discussions around public washrooms and access to public washrooms at the stations. Could you just remind us where the public washrooms will be, which stations they'll be located, and how they'll be provided?
There's 4 stations. Sorry, what was the second part, Councillor?
Just how they're provided, like are they in the fair, like?
Yes, they're in the fair paid zone.
Yeah,
So we have washrooms at Blair and Tunney's, and I'm just off memory, Bayview, and there's another one.
I think Herdman. Yeah,
Yes.
okay. And for for the stations where there are no washrooms, is there going to be any kind of signage to say where, if somebody's on the train and has to go, is there going to be any indication for folks that, they can possibly use a washroom at the next station? How are we going to accommodate for not having them at every station, just in terms of messaging for folks?
It's a mix of things, so pushing out the information about washrooms. I know CTV had that on their news last night, but the other thing that we're doing is at critical locations where we know there's washrooms nearby, we're seeing if we can connect up with mall owners and so forth. I know Councillor Brockington's asked the same thing. Could you get some type of signage that says, there's a washroom over there and so forth? So.
Right, and that would be outside of the fair paid zone then?
It's a mix,
Yeah,
it's a
okay.
mix, yeah.
And the washrooms that we will be, that will be available in the fair paid zones, will they be gender neutral washrooms, or are we going to take that step forward?
The 2 washrooms that you added are gender neutral, is my recollection. The other ones are male, females.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Conseiller Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur Manconi, moi j'avais quelques questions au niveau, premièrement, je pense que tout le monde, vous n'avez pas besoin de ressummariser ça, mais je voulais vous demander, on a encore des éléments de travaux qui ont lieu à l'évaluation, surtout au niveau du paysagement. En tant que conseiller, on a des demandes des résidents parce que là, évidemment, le train va ouvrir. Quelles sont les bonnes procédures pour la communauté? Surtout, ce qui me vient en tête, c'est entre la station de l'Université d'Ottawa puis la station Lise, il y a encore beaucoup de paysagement à faire dans ces environs-là. Est-ce que une approche comme...
On n'a pas la date exactement, tout le travail qui remain pour autour de Ottawa U, mais on peut prendre ça, donner ça à toi, à ton bureau.
Okay. I just... The contractor will say, well, you have a period. The fall, the spring. These are all landscaping features.
No, absolutely. We've got all that covered, I can assure you. But what I'll do is I'll get Mr. Morgan to come and brief your office directly on what's going to get done when.
Great. And then my final question relates to spaces in the station. So can you remind us, obviously there's always business opportunities and the customer experience, the little cafes and so on that eventually could happen in various areas. What is remind us of the intent and remind us of if there is a process for applications for future businesses in our stations.
So we do have commercial space in a number of stations. We do have a preferred person that bid on it. We are in the final stages. Mr. Willis and his real estate team are finalizing that. We have some exciting news that will be coming as soon as we finalize the documentation with that company. It'll provide some excellent amenities for our customers. The other spaces, don't forget, is we did some amazing work with the buskers. We have buskering spaces designated, artistic space designated. We have the art program. And when you get through the stations, you'll see all that. The busker signs just went up a few days ago. The fit-up space, once we sign the contract, I know the proponent wants to move very quickly. So it'll be that all-in experience that you're talking about.
So just to clarify what you were saying, so there is the window for submissions for the businesses and stations is closed, and you're expecting news, but that would be the full sum of commercial spaces that are available that will be dealt with as part of that agreement?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Merci. Councillor Menard, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. We held a Ready for Rail session last night, which was very well attended and had some very good feedback from folks. People are excited about the rail line coming in. Councillors Brockington, Cloutier, Deans, and Meehan were there as well. My question is around that, several residents have raised their bus lines changing as a result of the rail coming online, and some of them, their service is being reduced. So what are we doing for those residents? I think it's a small percentage compared to the folks that will be improving service, but what are we doing for the folks that are saying, look, my service is being reduced as a result of bus changes happening in congruence with the LRT coming online?
No, it's a great question. We, yourself, Councillor Eggle, I don't know where he is, but he had a similar discussion with me, and it wasn't about reduced, it was about scope and scale of change, and you've seen a few tweets about there is a very small percentage of our customer base that will have a double transfer and so forth. So what I'm telling councillors is the following. Let's get through the launch. Let's get through the bus route changes. Let's implement your $5.1 million investment, which affects just about everybody that had challenging routes. And then council has the new budget that's coming. I know there's further investments coming there. That's why we've got to keep the fares going and all those things so that we can fund all that stuff and the capital and the operating. And then we're going to work with councillors. Nothing is perfect in life. So we're going to have some routes that may need some tweaking, councillor, and we're happy to work with any councillor. But all we're asking for is some support and patience to get through this largest change in the history of your transit system ever. Get through that, and then I believe there will be a few pockets that we're going to have to go a little bit the extra mile and sort it out and get innovative in that regard.
Okay, very much appreciate that, Mr. McConey. And just last question around the reliability piece came up a lot last night as well. And so is there any more information about why that shutdown occurred just recently with the train and more that we can get out publicly today?
Yeah, so I can tell you that RTG believes very strongly that the lightning storm did have an impact. We are zeroing in on root cause. They have some preliminary analysis. We need to give them time to go through the root cause on what exactly occurred. And it's like I said last week in terms of everything worked the way it was supposed to, and there's the root cause piece. There was two questions remaining. What caused it? And what was the root cause? We're zooming in on those, and as soon as we can share that information, we will.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Blais, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and echo the congratulations to you and your team, Mr. Marconi. One question that remains outstanding is Orleans residents who currently can take one bus to get to work in Gatineau will obviously now face some challenges or a change in their ride. I'm wondering if you have clarity or when we expect clarity on the integration with STO and the transfer over to Portage and Chaudière.
So we have a meeting, I believe it's this week with STO. They, as you can appreciate, with our changes in our dates, our delays, they had to adjust accordingly. They've asked for a lot of notice because it impacts them very significantly, and for those councillors that don't know, the STO buses, many of them are going to terminate at Lyon Station, so you're getting your downtown core back. You're going to have fewer buses, increased reliability of all your routes and so forth. So it's a huge change, and that took over a year of negotiations with the previous chair and the mayor and STO. We don't have a formal date as to when they're going to do their change. The mission is this week. I need to draw that out of them, and then I will share that with you. But they are they're being very cautious. It is a very significant change for them also, and so I'll know later this week, hopefully. We're planning to ask them to give us a timetable to get back to us on the dates. Okay?
Councillor Meehan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. McConey, one of the issues, the questions that arose last night at our Ready for Rail meeting was from senior citizens who are concerned about their passes, or if their passes are going to work for them.
Yes, Councillor, and if I may, my staff briefed me on the session yesterday, and they so appreciated all the positive stuff that you did there in terms of the tweeting out and so forth. So the seniors piece, that was part of the debrief from every session that we hold. I heard all the comments firsthand. I've heard it myself. So seniors, if their Presto card is programmed, they can get through, no problem. However, remember you have the kiosk there with you press the button, you have a live agent. If there's any issue, they press that. The agent can override the gate if there's any issue or they didn't get their card programmed, that we let them in free. And so there's that. But what I asked Mr. Scrimger and the marketing and communications team is to, from all your sessions and your feedback, we adjust our comms plan accordingly. So on the seniors piece, we're going to push out more information. Happy to get that to you too if you want to get it out to your residents also.
Okay. And one other thing, there was some concern that when they get to Pimisi, how the seniors who go up to Good Companions are going to get there, because it's quite a hike from Pimisi up to, where they are on what is it, Albert? But how they get to the Good Companions, because the bus used to drop them off right at the front, and that's no longer going to happen.
I know I don't have all the details, but I know we had a very good session with Councillor McKenney at the Good Companions. I think it was a week ago. And I think we were addressing all those questions there. I don't have the answers for you, but we can certainly follow up, or perhaps Councillor McKenney knows off the top. But we take care of those folks because there's a need to make sure that we're all inclusive there. So it's on our radar screen.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Councillor Meehan. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. McConey, just for clarification, you and I have had some discussions around people traveling to the Gatineau side, in particular to Les Terrasses and Promenade, and some confusion about how that's going to work and whether there is going to be a connection that will get people directly to both of those locations for work purposes. I'm wondering if you could comment on that and clarify what the service is going to be in that regard.
Again, great feedback we had from yourself, Councillor, and Mr. Scrimger is targeting the information because I think people are overcomplicating their route. I know there's some good choices for customers there. We're also going to equip our people with red vests at Tunney's because it will be a major transfer point for people to get there. And Pat, I need a briefing from him because I know he had his meeting with you. How is he going to push that information out? So it's on the list. I just don't have that with me. But it's a very good point.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions on this item? Okay, so next is Stage 2 LRT update. Mr. Manconi, or?
Mr. Morgan's going to take you through Stage 2.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a quick update on Stage 2. Stage 2 will add, just as a reminder, 44 kilometers of rail, 24 stations, 45 vehicles, and 2 additional maintenance and storage facilities. The total economic output from the project is approximately $5.6 billion and over 27,000 person-years of employment. And with Stage 2 completed, the city's O-Train network will bring 77% of Ottawa residents within 5 kilometers of fast, efficient, clean, and reliable light rail service. So I'll start with the Trillium Line extension and talk a little bit about the work that's happening there. This is the overview project schedule showing when construction is going to start in different parts of the city. So if you see the purple solid line on the left, work has already started in that portion of the alignment. I'll show you some photos of the work that's ongoing there. The dotted blue line on the right, that's work that will start following the shutdown in May 2020. There's a lot of coordination effort in that area, including the MTO replacing the bridge over the Trillium Line, doing a grade separation of the crossing with Via Rail, essentially kind of refurbing the current Rideau River Bridge and extending all of the station platforms, adding 2 new stations to that area. In terms of the work that's basically been in progress to date, it's been a lot of geotechnical investigation, removal of trees, removal of topsoil, and getting ready to do the more advanced designs on the alignment. So if we go to a photo, so this is a quick, just a shot of some of the tree removals, the topsoil removal. This is actually the location where the main track will diverge and provide a connection to the south and a connection to the airport link. From here, the grade of the line will increase, go to the right, and we'll go over the airport parkway, stay at elevation to get to the airport, and then we'll continue further south at grade with grade crossings at each of the major intersections. Some of the work is elevated guideway, other work is putting the train onto an embankment. So this is some of the early utility work that we need to do to start building that embankment. Some of the early utility investigations to make sure where we go to put our footings and our foundations for the stations and for the elevated guideway, we're not obviously running into anything in the ground there. A new maintenance facility is going into Walkley Yard. So the existing Walkley Yard is on a leased CP facility, and there's a lead track that runs from that existing facility to the Trillium Line main line. It actually runs through the future footprint of the new facility. So the first thing that we had to do was actually move that track essentially over to the left, get it out of the way so that we can start construction on the new Walkley facility. So that Walkley facility comes off of the leased land and goes on to permanent city-owned lands. A little bit more in the south, I'll show you a photo here. This is just a little bit on the airport link. This is a caisson casing or a caisson sleeve that's being installed. This is a section of, essentially there's an elevation change. We go from at grade over kind of a number of roads in the airport area to get to the upper level of the airport where we provide the connection to the airport from the Trillium Line. So some early work there, some early kind of construction. You'll see a lot of activity in this area basically going forward. And then just as a reminder on the new vehicles, we're getting 7 new vehicles, Stadler vehicles. It's the Flirt vehicle. They're roughly 80 meters in length. They're being fully manufactured and assembled in Switzerland at that facility. They'll be taken apart, brought to Canada by boat and then by truck, reassembled at the new Walkley facility, and then they'll undergo final testing at Walkley Yard and on the line to demonstrate integration of the system, but also to get the final Transport Canada approvals. This is still a federally regulated railroad, and we follow all the Transport Canada regulations. So that's what's the status of the Trillium Line. Onto the O-Train, the Stage 2 of the Confederation Line, east and west. So we'll start with the east. Here's essentially the overview of the construction works and the timing of the works. The crux of the works in the east is really the Montreal road exchange. The soils in that area are difficult to work with, and so the contractors wanted to get into that area first. They've set up a staging area close to Montreal Road, which you can actually see as you drive along the 174. You'll see a lot of work in this area to begin with, and then next year you'll start to see the work further to the east all the way out to Trim. So just some photos here. So this is some of the staging area that they're building up. Not a lot of activity in terms of comparables to what you're seeing on actual in the track, but they're ready to go. Just Quickly about the west, so obviously there's already been a lot of work. You've seen a lot of work along the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. There's been some preliminary tree removals. There's more tree removals happening next month and into November. So just a kind of a quick look at the construction schedule. So this is really broken up into 3 areas. The purple dotted line, really this is where they're doing the trench construction to build a cut and cover tunnel. So the 2.5 kilometer tunnel that will run essentially from Dominion and pop out right close to New Orchard and Lincoln Fields. To the further west, you see a lot of activity that starts next year, and then there's a little section just in the upper right-hand corner of the diagram that shows in red the last section that essentially that Tunney's to Dominion section, which is actually not going to start until 2021. So you see how the project is split up into those 3 areas. The first thing that they really focused on was doing the geotechnical investigation in the west in order to move the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway over to make space for the cut and cover tunnel. So we've started moving the road, we've started moving some of the multi-use pathways. Everything's essentially shifting over so we can make space for that trench. So looking ahead for the rest of the year, you're going to see a few more tree removals into November through Byron Linear Park and a few other areas along the SJAM to kind of get stuff out of the way. You're going to see additional geotechnical, and very quickly by the end of the year, you'll see the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway shifting over so we can start work on the cut and cover tunnel, which is essentially the crux of the work in the west. So with that, I'll take questions on the Stage 2 work in progress.
Okay, thank you. Just on the last, if you go back to the last slide about the tree cutting, I know Councillor Kavanagh is aware of this. This is going to be a big shock to people in the West End, particularly in my neighborhood, where all of the trees basically are coming down on the Byron Linear Park. And I asked staff to make sure that we really over-communicate that issue, because I think when the chainsaws come out, people are going to say, I didn't know this was happening, but there is a reforestation plan that will actually provide more trees than is there now. So staff, I think, are going to try to do something from a design point of view on the signs to let people know not to be surprised when these beautiful trees that have been there for a long time are cut down, because that's going to be the trench to the western part of the LRT. Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Morgan, I have a question for you on a first slide. When you talk about transit will be within 5 kilometers for any part of the city, I must miss something what you said. Can you put back slide number 1? Maybe number 2, the 5 kilometers, Stage 2 complete, the city all train network will bring 77 Ottawa residents within 5 kilometers. 5 kilometers from where? Like, where's the measurement here?
Essentially, if you draw a planning circle around the stations around the line, and then you overlay the population of the city onto that,
Okay.
you're able to capture 77%.
Okay, I thought your calculation was wrong, because from Fitzroy to that section is about 40 kilometers, or maybe so.
You're in the 23%.
Thank you. Councillor Dudas, please.
Perfect, thank you. First of all, I'll just say I'm very excited about Stage 1, but I'm even more excited about Stage 2 for the East End in particular. That's not my question. I have 2 questions. So the Sadler vehicles, I had an opportunity to have a resident of mine who has accessibility issues come out and see what the Stage 1 vehicles look like. He was very appreciative of a lot of the accessibility features, and he had some feedback in respect to maybe some improvements going forward. Is there any leeway with these vehicles to add those changes to increase accessibility at all to those vehicles that are coming in?
So I guess there's always opportunity for feedback, and certainly we did, in Stage 1 on the Alstom vehicle, there was a lot of discussions. There was a mock-up. It was a big vehicle order. These vehicles will be similar in design and nature to what we have today on the Trillium line, similar to the Alstom vehicles, the diesels that we have today. We've tried to take into consideration some of those, the early kind of feedback we received about the number of doors, being able to get on and off the vehicles. So currently today with the doors, if you have a door cut out, you have to take that vehicle out of service. It's difficult to get the passenger off. adding extra doors provides some redundancy. There is an opportunity, if there's kind of feedback on the final footprint of how the seats work in that accessible area, to provide that feedback. So I'm happy to take that back and see if there's an opportunity to incorporate that.
Wonderful, I'll make sure that he's connecting. And I have another question in respect to revenue generation and utilizing the stations, particularly in the East End. The stations themselves will be in the middle of the highway, which puts some limitations, but also might add some opportunities. And I'm just curious in respect to what opportunities we're looking for in terms of either adding any retail, any using the stations for things like, for instance, leasing out to communications, utilities, anything that we can do to help generate some revenue into the city's coffers to, make sure these things are paying.
In terms of the current design of the stations, for those stations in the east, they don't include retail spaces, so that's not part of the current design. I know Mr. Manconi's looked a lot in the past at kind of advertising opportunities and that type of thing, so I'll defer to him on that.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the space for retail, but also just to manage expectations on retail. They're not large-scale operations because you have a very busy system. People aren't lingering like a commuter rail system and so forth. They're in and out. And a lot of the studies that we looked at and actually visited a lot of the sites, subways, high-volume subways and stuff, the retail hasn't done well. You can actually look it up online. There's been a lot of bad retail spaces where people have tried to draw too much money out of it. Our proposal, we went out twice for stage one. We got very, very innovative in terms of we didn't want to be in the retail space management business because it's not our expertise, so we've got a good revenue split that's coming our way, but you have to be very specific on what types of retails, and it's very limited because people they just want to go and get their train, and the service is so frequent, there's no lingering time. It's not like a commuter rail system or Up Express where you're going to the airport and so forth. So there's no space. But there is a review of all the advertising space that we have. The mayor's asked for that. The first 2 years we don't do advertising. We're coming back with a full report, and I think that's an opportunity for some revenue generation there.
Well, and if I can ask that you not just consider the advertising, but potentially, like I said, communications opportunities. Many of us throughout our communities are already being approached by various communications groups asking for towers to be put up. Maybe this is an opportunity to utilize a space that we're already building that is accessible to communities. There's probably tons of opportunities, best practices across the world of municipalities doing this kind of thing. So I just ask that you continue to look at that, and I'll work with you to do it if you wish.
Great, thank you, Councillor Dudas. Councillor Cavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for this presentation. Of course, Bay Ward is incredibly excited about Stage 2. They're treating the Confederation line as kind of a warm-up act for Stage 2 because it's kind of a tease for them, since they will still continue to go on buses and then transfer over to Confederation line. So my questions and concerns are about accessibility to stations. As we're planning these routes, we still have work to do in terms of making sure that we work with our public works and also the NCC on making good routes, walking routes to the stations. This is something that's still in progress as we figure out access points to the stations. And I want to say I appreciate that we're going to be meeting with the community, that your team is coming out to meet with Bay Ward community. This is very, very important because we still have a lot of work to do on that side. I've always said that we've wasted billions of dollars if people can't walk to the station. We have to have good routes. We have to ensure that snow clearing and other things are prioritized so that people can get there. It's not just about the station, it's about getting there. So I just want your comments on plans on that. Thank you.
So absolutely, we've met with a number of councillors to date, and I think that's been kind of the primary focus is connectivity to the stations, walking, cycling, drop-offs, but wanting to understand the bus connections. So there's a team working on that, lockstep with OC Transpo and with transportation planning to make sure that we get all of your feedback and that we make all of the connections to the stations, as good as they can be.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just one question, and that's regarding Walkley Station. Within a radius of about 300 meters, there's 4 things that are going to be happening over the next 3 or 4 years. The Bank Street redesign will have a new crosswalk that connects the Ridgemont community to the west side of Bank. The RioCan property, which has a Swiss Chalet and a new Starbucks, will have a multi-use pathway built through it to go west. The private property on that side is going to have 2 new condo towers built. Site plan's been approved. And then you get to our property, the rail line, which is about 200 meters south of Walkley Road. We're going to build a multi-use pathway. Let's assume the buildings are delayed, the RioCan property is delayed. Help me understand how we will continue to build our pathway through these properties to connect to Bank Street. I want to know what our plan is, and again, if you don't have the answer now, that's something I just want you to take note of, but both community associations on either side want to know if the private development is delayed for whatever reason, will we still have the connectivity the communities are expecting to get from the residential communities to Walkley Station? So if I could leave that with you, I would like an answer.
Absolutely, we'll take that away. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Luloff, please.
Thanks so much for your presentation. Really looking forward to riding the train for the first time this weekend. A lot of hard work went into this. I'd like to provide direction to staff on stage 2. Given that a fatal collision occurred on the slip lane at the Jeanne d'Arc and 174 overpass, and that the redesigned intersection will provide enhanced safety for pedestrians and those accessing transit on the bridge, would staff please assess the prioritization of the improvements to the Jeanne d'Arc and 174 overpass as part of LRT Stage 2 construction, with a view to beginning these improvements in the spring of 2020. Thank you.
Okay, so that's direction to staff. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on stage 2? No. Thank you very much. Next item 3 is Ottawa Stadium update. We have a presentation by Steve Willis.
Oh. Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Dudas.
I have a motion in respect to this. I don't know what the appropriate time is.
Maybe we'll just get the presentation first and I'll come right to you.
Sounds good.
Thank
So, Mr. Mayor, members committee, the purpose of this presentation is to bring before committee the responses to the inquiry Councillor Deans placed on the council agenda several weeks ago. We were asked to make sure we brought this well in advance of the subsequent council meeting, and our effort today is to answer the questions that were posed. Mr. Chenier is going to assist me in responding to some of these questions, as well as Mr. Radke, who is the acting director of the Corporate Real Estate Office. I will ask your indulgence. My voice is weak today, so if I'm not clear enough, please let me know. Thank you. So just as a reminder, the 2 questions that were asked of the team were to identify the specific delegated authority staff relied to negotiate the lease for the stadium, where the terms and conditions are different from the terms and conditions approved by council, including the assignment of naming rights, and 2, identify the specific dates, staff, and timelines associated with the request for a new change in the terms and the various steps taken to establish the new agreement and lease. I will also say that we did provide a written response, was circulated on Friday to all members of council to these questions. Just a quick chronology in time, and again, I'll be brief about this, is the 2013 established the Champions Baseball Club as the preferred proponent to enter into a lease the council approved through a procurement process. By July 2018, the lease was in a default position based on arrears for lease payments. As is normal through any lease arrangement the city has, staff's first response is to get into discussions with the group that's leasing any city facility to try to resolve the default condition through repayment plans. And those discussions are outlined in more detail in the written response to find a remedy to the default. By March of this year, the preferred approach was to terminate the lease and which ended the lease, and switch to a short-term arrangement, which is a facility use agreement with a payment plan to recoup the arrears that were under the lease. That took till May to complete as an agreement in principle and was not signed until July. And as soon as it was signed, we reported to council through an IPD the results of those discussions. Excuse me for a second. So as to the status of the 2013 lease, I have to be perfectly clear, the lease is terminated. It no longer exists as a result of the defaults of the terms and conditions. Staff do have authority under the delegation of authority bylaw to terminate any lease on city facilities when the tenant is in a default position, and that is also spelled out in all of the leases themselves. The seasonal facility rental permit, which is a short-term bridge arrangement until we understand what the future of the club will be. And I want to emphasize this is a short-term arrangement. If we have any indication at any point that there is a longer-term solution, that would come back to council for approval. But this is only a short-term bridge arrangement with the intent of allowing this season to continue and to recover the monies owed to taxpayers through the repayment plan. So under the seasonal facility rental permit, the Champions are permitted this season to use the facility. These permits are under Mr. Chenier's delegated authority under the delegation of authority bylaw and are commonly used for sports facilities across the city. This is not a lease. It does not have the same rights as a lease, and it's a permit to use a city space for specified periods of time and does not accrue exclusive rights or privileges that a lease would have on a property, subject to user fees annually approved by council. In terms of the permit conditions in this particular case, the facility rental agreements typically deal with use conditions tailored to the intended use of the site. So they're tailored depending on the nature of the facility, such as fees for parking or admission, use of equipment, security, site vending, etc. And that will vary depending on what the city facility happens to be. And the rates were set and approved by council based on approved commercial rental rates. Those are the annual rates we use for these facilities. And this allowed the Champions to complete the agreement with RCG. One unique thing is we allowed them to complete the RCGT arrangement for the 2019 season because that agreement was not between RCGT and the city. It was between RCGT and the Champions. That agreement could not be assigned to us, and that revenue allowed them to provide a revenue stream to assist in repaying us and recouping the money for taxpayers, and we could not replace that agreement with our own direct agreement during 2019. So it is about assisting with the financial viability to meet the repayment plan and avoid any early cancellation penalties for that agreement. And the permits have only been issued for the 2019 season. So if there are any questions, Mr. Mayor, we'd be pleased to answer them, and Mr. Chenier and Mr. Radke may assist me in responding.
Okay, Councillor Dudas has a motion.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to, I saw this was coming up. I've seen publications in various media outlets, and I wanted to make sure that the city is being strategic and proactive in its approach to the stadium and its ownership. And I also recognize the fact that, you know, we're about to unlock the economic opportunities with this stadium with the start of LRT. So I think it was, I put this motion together being that it's prudent that we be proactive, as I said. Whereas there have been published reports that the Ottawa Champions are in discussions to sell the team, and whereas the Ottawa Stadium is an important facility for sport and community usage, attracting over 100,000 participants in 2019 from all areas of the city, including Ottawa Champions baseball games, University of Ottawa and Carleton University baseball activity, and community events and championships. And whereas it would be prudent and beneficial for the city to assess the impact of the launch of the Confederation Line and of the Stage 2 expansion on the continued viability of this centrally located sport and community facility, and whereas staff are of the opinion that the lands located adjacent to the Ottawa Stadium should see a significant increase in value once Stage 2 is completed, and whereas Council has already carried a report that identified the Ottawa Stadium as a redevelopment opportunity in the next 7 to 15 year timeframe, therefore it be resolved that Finance and Economic Development Committee recommend Council approve that should the Ottawa Champions enter into an agreement of purchase and sale, staff be mandated to meet with the prospective purchasers of the team to review the financial viability of their proposal to continue baseball at the stadium and to ensure protection of Ottawa taxpayers, including the new ownership group's capacity to enter into a long-term lease, 7 to 10 years, the new ownership group's capacity to cover any and all prior arrears which may have accrued at the end of the 2019 season. Include in lease negotiation the city's ability to redevelop strategic parts of the stadium lands once LRT is fully implemented. Identify the appropriate cost recovery and revenue sharing model that minimizes costs to taxpayers. Delegate to staff the authority to negotiate a lease agreement in time for the 2020 season, and report back to the Finance and Economic Development Committee and Council for approval of the lease before the start of the 2020 season. Be it further resolved that Council directs staff to work with all interested members of Council, local and national community groups, and stakeholders to identify opportunities for increased community usage of the Ottawa Stadium, including opportunities to increase public and community usage of the facility, including opportunities for increased community usage outside of the baseball season, and opportunities to attract a more diverse mix of sport uses, including increased college and university access, lacrosse, cricket, and other community sports options.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Elshintiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Willis, I'm not sure if my question is to you or to legal. I'm always intrigued by the, like we just heard this motion from our colleague, and I'm hoping everybody will agree, and that will give delegate authority to staff. And then when staff have delegate authority, then we question why the staff did what they're supposed to do. So I'm interested in legal. What's the, was staff follow the direction of council? In a simple yes and no, I'll be happy to hear. Was staff follow that direction from council in dealing with the stadium?
Mr. Mayor, I believe that they did, as you've heard through the presentation of the general manager.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Councillor Fleury.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So I have questions relating to the existing status. So we have a default situation by the current operators for whom we have a payment plan, and then we have a new agreement relating to the, I'll say the pay-per-use conditions. So can you maybe articulate to us and committee just the clarity of how both fit into one another? Because I've worked in the past in facilities, and I've seen individual organizations, when they were in default, we had payment plans, but they weren't allowed to renew until the default or the payment plan was resolved. And I've also seen, for example, in the Broward Market, businesses for which finance went after for much smaller amounts. So I want to understand what the logic is around the issues of the previous agreement, and then how we're bridging that to the payment plan and the existing fees of the new contract. I don't know how to define it better.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'll give an initial response, and the Treasurer may have more to add to this. First of all, this is a short-term arrangement. I want to emphasize this. This is a short-term to give the team a chance to get back in a position where they can operate again. And should they not be in a position, we will have a different report, different strategy going forward. This will come to an end, and we'll come back to council with future options for the stadium should that happen. But if they can get themselves back into position, if they can find another opportunity to ensure that taxpayers get their money back, that's preferable for us. Now, first and foremost, the repayment plan is separate from the fees they must pay to operate this year. They must pay the fees to operate as they get, and I believe they have. Mr. Chenier was nodding correctly. So the repayment plan, they still owe us that money. That is a contractual obligation, and I don't know if the Treasurer has anything to add.
Thank you. So total agreement with what GM Willis has said. As long as we have a repayment agreement, we don't consider them to be in arrears. So when we terminated the lease and we were able to enter into a repayment agreement, that allowed us to then move to the next step to go into the short-term arrangement with them. We did that basically because if we didn't extend the agreement with them to allow them to use the facility, our chances of recovering any of those arrears were basically zero. So this was to try to get them to continue at least for this year and to try to recoup some of the money that they owed us.
So could you confirm they've made payments to the arrears in terms of the payment plan, and they've also made payments based on the new arrangement for the pay-per-use condition? So there's two sets of payments that would have come in. Are they in default of any of those this new approach?
I can't actually confirm that, Councillor. I don't have that information. I know the last time I checked on it, I know the July payment had been made. So I don't know if there was a payment, I think, in early September. I don't know if that's been made yet. So I can get that information, but at this point in time, I don't have it.
Mr. Mayor, likewise, I can confirm that the July payments, we did work out with the champions a payment schedule for the entire season. Can confirm that the earlier payments have been made, but because their season just ended, there quite likely will be some outstanding balance that will be due within the next few weeks.
Okay. Baseball games are far from happening until April. We're going into the fall. That gives us close to 10 months of work that can happen. I think the agreement with the organization, we want to see baseball use. That's certainly in line with the motion that's presented to us. But I would ask us to consider a different approach. Now they're renting the facility per use. They're not renting the facility, which means that that facility falls officially to a 40 to 50 day use. There's still well over 300 days of use of that facility. And yes, the community use component of Councillor Dudaz's motion is part of the component. But as Dan would know, we've had approaches from other organizations, non-for-profit. We've had other baseball organization at the national level approach us. And I wonder, I think the facility needs to stay at its core as a sporting venue and as a baseball venue, but it can diversify its sport use. So I don't understand why, knowing where we've gone and hoping that the champions get back on track, they're still only going to use 50 days of the year. That facility needs to start by the fact that it's connected to LRT, by the fact it's centrally located. We need to define what that vision will be for that space. I know that Mr. Willis had talked about the use of the parking lot, for new housing opportunities. I'd love to see a repurposing of not losing the focus of baseball, but expanding the sporting uses of that facility. Because right now we're stuck in a pro baseball 10,000 seat stadium, and it really limits its opportunity. But it's so you're a station away from Ottawa. You're in the core of the city. There's just so much opportunity. In one hand, I get the motion, we don't want to give it up. We want to give baseball a chance. In another end, they've played their hands. They now can only afford when they use, and that's fine. That's fine. Maybe that's the future, and we shouldn't undercut their efforts. But we should look to the public's interest in this, and this is the 300 other days that exist at that stadium. So I would supplement or do a friendly amendment to also do a visioning exercise and come back by the end of the year to see what could we do additionally to the motion in terms of community use to see what is the vision for that site with a clear direction of keeping the baseball as a primary use and seeing if other uses or other sports uses can be complementary to the existing facility.
Councillor Fleury, I think that really is what you suggested is a good idea. It isn't captured in the final, be it further resolve, to identify opportunities for increased community use and so on. So I think that does address your concern, because I agree with you that there's, it's not a multi-purpose facility. It's a unipurpose facility. It's a baseball diamond, a baseball stadium. But there are other activities that can go in, either other sports activities or community use. There have been concerts there. I'm not suggesting that, but we have to recognize that I think Miles, what's his last name? Miles Wolf, the owner, was accounting on the LRT to be there to bring a lot more customers from the east end and the west end and go over the Max Keeping Bridge, it would be perfect. So I think, you know, I'm certainly supportive of the motion because I think it does capture what you're suggesting as well. Plus, at the same time, we recognize that, you know, there have been reports that he's entertaining offers because I think he wants to retire and move back to the States.
So I'm comfortable with the way you're describing it, but I would ask that staff prepare or do an analysis and bring back to this committee or council a report about the visioning, some visioning, because baseball is only, like the next season is in April. That gives us all fall and early, all through the winter. By that time, hopefully, hopefully we'll know where Miles is, and hopefully the champions are back in 2020. But that again leaves us with back to the motion. So I wonder if the motion could just be a little clearer in terms of what are we expecting of Mr. Willis and Chenier in terms of reporting back, in terms of visioning, perhaps.
Maybe Mr. Manconi, sorry, not Manconi, the nameplate's there, Mr. Willis. If you could perhaps wordsmith something that encaptures what Councillor Fleury is looking at and Councillor Dudas, are you okay with that? You know, we don't need a large, you know, bureaucratic report on this. I think there are some ideas that are out there, and you've probably had some pitched to you over the years, and certainly Councillor King as the ward councillor should be consulted as the motion states as well.
Mr. Mayor, may I recommend, I think the motion could stand as it is, and we could take a direction from committee to bring a report back on between the two departments on the opportunities for the site as the council recommends. I think we agree with what is being asked. So if the councilor is comfortable, we can take direction from the committee and should the motion adopt.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Blais, please.
Thanks for, excuse me, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a clarity on item C. Once LRT is fully implemented, are we thinking stage 2 for that, or are we thinking, you know, Monday morning?
Mr. Mayor, I think the intent, and I have to read the councillor's mind on this, but I think the intent is that this was stage 1, because understand that during the construction of stage 1, not only did they not have the service coming, there was actually reduced bus access to the site during stage 1. So that was a bit of a, we have to understand that facility wasn't most fortunate in terms of its accessibility, and we want to see the opportunity after stage 1 opens, where accessibility is considerably higher.
Perfect, thank you very much. And to Mr. Chenier, or to whomever is best positioned to answer, does the natural grass limit our ability to diversify the use of the facility? Would turf make it more attractive to other options?
Mr. Mayor, we have, over the last few years, tried to market the site for other types of sports. Certainly there's been some uptake from Ultimate at one point. The configuration, as the mayor was mentioning, it is a purpose-built site, and the previous lease under which we were operating had some very stringent requirements in terms of turf quality, which required us, amongst other things, to have dark days the day before and the day after games and those kinds of things. This year, under the permit agreement, we've set that aside, and we've been able to fill those days with community use, primarily baseball, though. There is university baseball, adult baseball is primarily interested in this. Going forward, if there were a main tenant for the site that plays in a league that has turf standards, then of course we would have to revisit that. I would suggest that we'd want to look carefully at any lease provision that might impact on community use, because this really did tie our hands a little bit in the last few years.
That's, I guess, what I'm getting at. Would artificial turf instead of grass allow for that turf quality and the use diversification?
Yes, I think with that it would both expand the use of sports activities and possibly even other types of activities that we haven't allowed on there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Moffat?
Just having a side chat with Councillor Blais, just thinking that if you look back to when we did this, and the reason why I think it's important to support this plan going forward is you don't know what the potential is. And in hindsight, of course, being 2020, had council made a different decision back in 2013, come 2017, you could have had certain individuals playing in Ottawa in our big year that these names might not mean something to everyone in this room, but names like Kevin Biggio and Bo Bichette and Sean Reed Foley and Nate Pearson, Vladimir Guerrero, Lourdes Gurriel, Aledmus Diaz, all these individuals might have actually been playing in the city of Ottawa had we gone in a certain direction and taken that chance back in 2013. It's easy to make a safe choice, but sometimes it's important to go out there and look to see what options are out there and be open to that as to what that could create, because while there might be some investment, the impact of those individuals being in this city in 2017 would have been very difficult to fully appreciate the impact financially, and also just having that type of atmosphere in the city of Ottawa with what those gentlemen have now become on the roster of a Major League Baseball team. So no, I think it's important to support this going forward, look at what the options are. Don't write it off just yet. Let's just see what's out there, what a new ownership group might be able to entertain in the city of Ottawa if successful. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Councillor McKinney, please.
On process, will this motion then come to council tomorrow? Clerk's office?
No, it'll go to the one in a couple of weeks.
So that's difficult. We should, just in terms of what Councillor Fleury was asking in terms of payment, we should have a clear understanding whether the August payment was made before we vote on this. So
Yeah,
how
so
can
it's
we
coming-
get that response?
Well, it's not coming tomorrow, it's coming to the meeting after, so we'll
Okay.
have an idea by
So
then.
we will know before we vote on this whether they made their August payment on time. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
I can get that from staff, is that correct?
Treasurer?
The treasurer says.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you. I thank you for your presentation on this. I think we all want to have this as revenue neutral as possible in terms of as not a drain on the city. But I will just ask if when we're looking at future options, that we take a look at female sports, because I think Bianca proved that people watch it and come out for things that are female. So it's an opportunity to promote female sports and teams. So I hope that will be taken into consideration in terms of new tenants. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Harder, please.
I know it's early in the days, but I'm just wondering, Mr. Willis, if staff have had a look at or have an opinion at all on what the value of this property will be post Stage 2.
Mr. Mayor, I don't think we can give a definitive answer right now, but intuitively, when Stage 2 opens, when this site becomes considerably more accessible from the east and the west, it's inevitable that the value of this property will go up considerably. So, we'll have a lift next week as a result of Stage 1 being open. We'll have a much bigger lift when Stage 2 is open, because it'll be very correlated to the ridership on the LRT system. So I think it's inevitable if we wait a little bit, this property is more valuable.
Great, it's a good point, thank you. Any other questions or comments? So on Councillor Dudas, thank you for the motion. On her motion, carried. All right, thank you. Next is item 5, proposed 2020 budget directions, timeline, and consultation process. Deputy Treasurer Isabel Jasmine will do the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on December 5th, 2018, Council approved a term of Council budget process as part of the 2018-22 Council Governance Review. That report directed the city treasurer to bring forward a report that details the budget timetable and provides budget directions in advance of each yearly budget. In this presentation, I will highlight the key elements that went into the recommendations in the report, provide an overview of the budget process between now and December, when the budget will be approved by council. Dans cette présentation, je soulignerai les éléments clés inclus dans les recommandations du rapport et donnera un aperçu du processus budgétaire d'ici le mois de décembre, ainsi que les dates clés. The estimated budget pressures were considered in the development of the recommended tax target. More is now known on the changes to provincial funding, but there could be further changes that will be included in the tabling of the budget in November. The key impacts are to public health, children's services, long-term care, and cancellation of the planned provincial gas tax increase. Labor contract settlements are included in the budget considerations. CPP contribution rate for employees and employers is gradually increasing from 4.95% to 5.95%, and increases to the years of maximum pensionable earnings will be phased in between 2019 and 2023. There are also changes to the Canadian Labour Code that will have impacts on the transit budget. Inflationary increases are also considered. This year, the construction price index remains high at 5.8%. This inflation estimate is used to determine the increase to the contribution to capital. Base adjustments are also to be included in the winter maintenance budget to reduce year-over-year deficits in this area. Changes were made to the city's insurance contract, increasing the overall cost of insurance. Also, the long-range financial plans for transit, tax, and rate identify the funding requirements, reserve balances, and debt levels required to maintain assets in a state of good repair over a 10-year period, and in case of transit for 30 years. The recommended 3% tax target considers all the known budget pressures estimated for 2020. Furthermore, each department reviewed the key operating and capital requirements to maintain services, opportunities for operational efficiencies, impacts of growth on operations, changes in regulation, and any other operational service changes. The 3% is the overall impact on the property tax. It includes a 2% increase to citywide, 3% increase to police services, and transit levy of 3%. Furthermore, in order to minimize the impact of the provincial government's decision to cancel the doubling of the gas tax, it is recommended that the $9.8 million contribution to capital approved by council for citywide to be moved to transit, and the additional $57 million of one-time federal gas tax funding to be allocated towards addressing the infrastructure gap for roads, bridges, and active infrastructure. This adds another 3.4% to the transit tax for a total of 6.4%, but the overall property tax increase remains at 3%. 3% est l'impact global sur l'impôt foncier. Il comprend une augmentation de 2% pour l'ensemble de la ville, 3% pour les services de police et une taxe de 6,4% pour le transport en commun. This slide shows the overall property tax increase on average single detached home and commercial property. The overall increase to an urban home and commercial property is 3%, and for a rural home it is only 2.5% because the transit tax portion is lower in rural areas. This slide summarizes the key known changes to date for provincial funding. Cette diapositive est un survol des principaux changements connus à ce jour en matière de financement provincial. The $6.3 million budget pressure for public health is due to the fact that the cost-sharing model is changing to a 70-30 split compared to a current 75-25 cost-sharing arrangement. The children's services impact of $6.3 million is the result of a change to the cost-sharing split for the child care expansion plan to an 80-20 cost-sharing beginning in January 2020 from a currently 100% funded program, and changing the cost-sharing for program delivery. The province was also planning to make changes to the allowable administrative funding from 10% to 5% and change sharing of these costs to 50-50. We were recently informed that this change is now delayed to 2021-2022. The impact to long-term care is $1.2 million due to the elimination of the high-wage transition fund, which is funding to maintain equitable service levels while addressing higher than average wage cost and the elimination of grant funding for capital works. It is important to note that the paramedic services are no longer on the list of provincial funding changes. They will continue at 50-50% cost sharing and provide for growth. As described earlier, this report recommends that the $9.8 million capital contribution to reduce the tax-supported infrastructure gap over the next 5 years be reallocated to transit, and that the one-time federal gas tax contribution be used instead over the next 3 years at $19 million a year, while continuing to increase the base for both citywide and transit by dividing up the additional $9.8 million over time. This will increase the amount of time required to address the citywide infrastructure gap by 3 years, but the overall funding allocated to citywide will increase by $13 million over those next 3 years. Based on preliminary impact information, staff estimate that assessment growth will be approximately 1.5%. D'après l'information préliminaire de la SEFM, on estime que la croissance de l'évaluation sera environ 1,5%. Although we have seen a surge in building permits recently, the impact of these on the tax assessment will only be seen in later years. Final tax roll and assessment data for the year will only be available at the end of December. Per the budget process approved by Council, the services governed by a board or commission will be allocated their individual prorated share of the 1.5% assessment growth. There is a recommendation that user fees increase in accordance with the directions outlined in the fiscal framework and the long-range financial plans. Water, wastewater, and stormwater fees are based on 100% cost recovery, and the long-range financial plan estimates that an overall increase in revenue of 5.2% is required for 2020. Solid waste fees increases are in line with the report presented to Committee and Council in April regarding the residential contract renewals, but there are additional pressures that will still need to be confirmed, but will be finalized and included in the budget tabled in November. Transit fares are to increase by 2.5% per the Transit Long-Range Financial Plan. The Directions Report includes an additional schedule of fees for recreation, culture, and facilities for 2021 to be approved by Council so that the fees can be charged when the fall-winter booking season starts in late summer before the 2021 budget is tabled. Today you are receiving the Budget Directions Report. If approved, it will help to set the envelope for the draft operating and capital budget to be tabled at Council on November 6th. Between now and November, public consultations will take place, and on the next slide I will provide you with a list of resources available to support this process. Once the draft budget is tabled in November, each committee, advisory committee, commission, and board will hold meetings to consider the 2020 draft budget and receive public delegations. Chairs and vice chairs will review their committee's budget as part of the agenda clearing meetings prior to the committee budget meeting date. The final budget and any proposed changes arising from the committees will be considered and adopted as Committee of the Whole on December 11th. Le budget final et toute proposition de modification émanant des comités seront examinées et adoptées en comité plénier le 11 décembre. The City will be using a variety of methods to engage with residents on the budget 2020. Councillor-led consultations will be held as in past years. Interactive online engagement will occur through ottawa.ca and Engage Ottawa, as well as the City's various social media channels. Engage Ottawa provides a comprehensive online engagement platform that will allow us to connect with residents in an interactive manner. Information about consultation and engagement opportunities will be promoted by public information, media relations, through the City's social media channels and traditional media products. If you have any questions related to this report or throughout the budget process, please feel free to contact myself, Isabel Jasmine, or Marion Simuluk. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. We have one member of the public who would like to speak to this before we open it up to councillors. Is Tanya Naylor here? Welcome. If you could just identify yourself, your group, and you have 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Tanya Naylor. I'm just here as a member of the public. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I applaud the city for embarking on the process to create its first women and gender equity strategy for implementation in 2020 and the steps it is taking to build a more equitable and inclusive city. The budgeting process is the foundation for setting priorities as a city, and it is with that in mind that I believe staff and council should consider gender equity throughout this process. In December, the federal government passed into law the Canadian Gender Budgeting Act, which states, taxation, the allocation of public resources, and other public policy decisions may produce various impacts on diverse groups with the potential to create, sustain, or reduce inequalities within society. The Act requires the federal government to consider gender and diversity in tax and spending decisions and to publish an analysis of gender impacts of budget measures. While this Act only applies to the federal government, I believe it can provide helpful direction to staff and council as it moves forward with the 2020 city budget. Who is most likely to benefit from jobs created because of city investment? Who is more likely to be impacted by service shortfalls or fee increases? Unfortunately, I believe that budgeting backwards from a predetermined property tax rate has the potential of leading to a budget that sustains inequality in our city. Instead of first considering the needs of all residents and establishing a budget from there, this approach places an overriding priority on minimizing the tax bill of property owners. I worry the result of this approach will lead to underinvestment in services and infrastructure that can promote equality or to increase user fees that disproportionately impact lower income residents. I think the risk of this approach can be seen by looking at childcare. I recently spoke at the Community and Protective Services Committee regarding the city's 5-year plan for childcare. The plan notes that licensed childcare is completely unaffordable for the majority of Ottawa families, and there is only space for 1 in 3 Ottawa children. It also notes there are retention issues in the childcare sector due to the low wages of the primarily female workforce. While the plan establishes broad goals for addressing these issues, the accompanying report notes that budget pressures from provincial funding changes may result in delays in achieving our strategic priorities to improve the system to better meet the needs of families. It also states that unless there are significant provincial changes, the city will not be in a position on January 1st to fully mitigate the lost provincial revenues with efficiencies, and this will impact services. With respect, that is a budget decision and should not be treated as a foregone conclusion. At the Community and Protective Services Committee, it was stated multiple times that staff will be preparing budget mitigation measures to ensure provincial childcare funding cuts do not result in municipal tax increases. However, I think a discussion should be warranted on whether that should be the main goal or whether strategy should be focused on ensuring the city is able to maintain services and make progress on its childcare goals. The lack of quality, affordable childcare has a disproportionate impact on women, as they are most often the ones who opt out of the workforce or scale back their careers when it is not available. I worry the proposed budget approach will at best mean the city simply treads water on the childcare crisis instead of making meaningful improvements to the system. At worst, I worry the fees that are already acknowledged as unaffordable for most families will increase. The City of Vancouver, in its Women's Equity Strategy, identified access to affordable quality childcare as an urgent issue and the #1 action that could immediately and positively impact all women's lives, their economic participation, and economic independence. That is equally true here in Ottawa. As such, I hope that Council will recognize the key role childcare plays in the lives of women and place sufficient priority on this vital community infrastructure in the budgeting process. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh has a question to the delegation. I think, is that correct, Councillor? Question to the delegation.
Well, thank you very much for your delegation. I really appreciate you bringing up the issue of gender equity in the budget process. This is very important. And as you've pointed out, there have been a number of setbacks related to the provincial funding. I just want to ask you, in terms of that, what do you see as the priority in terms of what the biggest problem in terms of the cutbacks that have hit us? I personally see childcare as a big problem because this is an ongoing economic issue that gets, that does our economy good here in the city. But I'd like your feedback. And by the way, we're going to have a session on September 30th, a public meeting on your input on gender equity. So I hope you'll be able to attend. Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the provincial funding changes is that childcare expansion, now the municipality has to contribute 20% of the funding that was previously 100% provincially funded. So the municipality is in the position of deciding whether to move forward with expansion projects, meaning that the operating dollars would be spread out amongst a broader number of spaces, which increases access, but then could potentially increase parent fees and take a step back on affordability. So it's trying to weigh access and affordability, which we really should be trying to make progress on both of those goals. So I think that as a city council, It's very unfortunate that the province is moving in this direction, but there needs to be a bit more pushback from the city towards the provincial government on what the on-the-ground impacts will be for childcare in Ottawa, and that these cuts are unacceptable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Meehan, to the delegation, or to, not to the delegation? Okay, so we'll get back to, any other questions to the delegation? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a number of people who have questions on the presentation. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. Question, Madam Treasurer, the 1% tax increase, how much will generate now for us with the new building permits and stuff?
Overall, for the entire city, it generates roughly, 1% generates roughly 16 million.
16 million?
16 million.
Okay, and if I heard correctly, the growth assessment is 1.5, but then they put next to it 28 million. So how could 1.5 go up to 28 if it's 1% 16? Is that 24 or less?
16 and 8 is 24, rounded up to
okay.
25.
The one-time only federal gas tax, what's the total of that amount?
They announced $57 million for the city of Ottawa. So I believe we've already received that amount.
57?
That's correct.
And on contribution to capital citywide is going to be total 19, is that correct? Or 19 million? Or it's going to be 28.8? That's on
we would, what we would do is that 57 million, we divide it in three. So we would put an additional, or we would put 19 million in towards the funding the citywide infrastructure renewal projects each year, 20, 21, 22. So that's how that 57 would be spent.
And with that additional funding from the gas tax, the one-time only gas tax, go into the capital infrastructure, would that meet the threshold? Because we are in deficit when it comes to capital investment. We know we're in deficit. I'm just wondering, where would that take us? Because the next 3 years is a great 3 years, but what will take us, please?
It's a little bit more over the 3 years than you would get under the plan we had originally proposed, which was to inject an additional 9.8 every year. So we'd be putting in 13, so you'd get that little bit of pickup. What it doesn't do is it doesn't fix your base, and that's why Ms. Jasmine said, if you adopt this plan, it helps transit, it fixes their base, but extends what you need to do probably for another 3 years. So as opposed to fixing your base issue in 5 years, you would fix it in over 8 years. So but on the other side, it actually helps transit and fixes their problem, which is a little more immediate than ours at this point in time.
So, just for clarification, as you pointed out, there'd be an increase from the 9 to the 13 million over 3 years for infrastructure, roads, and so on.
That's correct.
But that will be, Mr. Mayor, if I understand, for the next 3 years, not for the base. Okay.
It is. You're going to accelerate a little bit in the next 3 years, but then you're going to get back to your regular plan, so you won't be losing ground, if that's what you're thinking in this process. You're going to get to where you want, and we've just bumped it up a little bit in the next 3 years, but then you'll get back on your plan to get back to an increase of your base of $50 million.
And the reason I'm asking you this, Mr. Mayor, is the 1% we committed to be toward infrastructure, and then we learned from the Treasurer it would be about 16 million, the 1%. But that 1%, if I remember, we were thinking to be in a base budget, not just for or at least for this term of council, because we cannot commit the next term of council.
Your plan was to increase your base by 50 million, and you were doing it over 5 years. So you actually were going into the next term of council just by 1 year. Okay. But you're not, what we're planning on doing here is to basically solve the gas tax problem, and it still allows the continuation of that investment that you need in the renewal of your other city assets.
Okay, that would be my question for now, Mr. Mayor. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions for the Treasurer. Page 11 is a chart that talks about the urban-rural impacts. What's the impact on the suburbs?
If you receive transit services, it's urban. So that's the difference between the rural and the urban. It's just transit zone A and B don't get full service. They only get a share of the paratransport costs. So your area would be urban.
Okay. And on page 2 and 12, you talk about the impacts of a 6.9 transit levy. Sorry, 6.4. My first question related to that 6.4, is that all LRT spending, or is it for buses as well?
So the 6.4 is really 3% for your operating, which includes buses and LRT, and then 9.8 million, which makes up the other 3.4%, which is to replace the provincial gas tax. That's not doubling. So that 3.4% is really for capital, for future capital, which includes buses and it includes LRT. And then the base 3% is to deal with the operating, which covers everything as well. So there's been some discussion that this is all about transition. This has nothing to do with transition. This is all about making certain that you have your base of your contribution to capital. Because the provincial gas tax isn't doubling, that we in fact substitute it with taxation instead.
Okay, so this is, even though it's an increase, there's no additional spending as part of that towards transit?
No, this is all about making certain that you preserve the plan that you have in place right now, because when they announced the doubling of the gas tax many years ago, we incorporated that into your long-range financial plan, your affordability model for transit. So if we don't get that doubling of the gas tax, which they've now said they're not going to do, you have a big hole in the plan. So what we've suggested here, basically substitutes that provincial dollars with taxation dollars. That's all it does. It doesn't change your spending plan. It doesn't change anything other than we need to make certain that the plan you went forward and approved, that we can actually sustain it in the future.
And if we decide that 6.4 is too big an increase, then we have to go in and look at the operations to make up the difference, cuts in service. Something.
You would have to go in and cut your capital program.
Capital program.
Your capital.
Okay, thank you, Madam Treasurer.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. So I'm just looking for some clarification. You've got a differing view in your recommendations, 3% increase for police, 2% for library, 2% for public health. We know that public health has certainly got its funding challenges. We know libraries in the middle of building the biggest, most beautiful library we possibly can, and they have their challenges as well. There's a statement in the report, the police levy is a separate levy and is recommended an increase by 3% overall, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of meat there explaining why the 3% choice over 2% choice, or alternatively raising everybody to 3%, including library and public health. I'm just trying to figure out what the rationale is, why you're recommending a different amount for police as opposed to the other boards and services that the city offers.
So police is self-contained with respect to capital. They don't actually use the citywide capital reserve or any of our capital funding. They run on their own, whereas the library, for example, actually uses the citywide reserve to renovate their libraries. Their capital is quite frankly, they use it for books. So when we looked at what we needed to do with respect to the provincial gas tax, although in the past we have set a tax increase of 3% on the citywide and 3% for police, and I think we had 3.5 last year for transit, that 3% on the citywide First off, we did was we took off the increase that you wanted for capital. So everybody actually got 2% last year. So the library got 2% last year, Ottawa Public Health got 2% last year, and the rest of the city, except for transit and police, got 2%. So this isn't really a change, it's just that we are now highlighting the fact that that $9.8 million, which we've taken from the citywide levy and put onto the transit levy, that's the difference that it makes. So certainly we can look at doing a different allocation, but right now, the way we've built it, you get to 3% overall.
No, I understand you get to 3% overall, but certain services are getting a higher amount of funding than others, and I'm still not understanding. I understand how the math works. I'm not understanding the rationale behind applying that math.
Because everybody who is uses city capital is on the citywide levy, and that's the piece that we're moving. We're moving that contribution to capital from the citywide to the transit. Police don't require or don't use the citywide reserve for their capital asks. They have capital built into theirs. So library, for example, they don't have a, what they need for capital comes out of the citywide. So we manage their capital for them. Same for public health. If they have capital requirements, it comes from the citywide. So that's the distinction that's made, is it's just breaking apart. Last year we could have said it's a 2% increase for everybody and on citywide plus a 1% capital. We're just breaking it apart this year and moving it onto the transit levy. So the distinction, it's the same as last year, Councillor. We should have probably shown it differently last year. You never got 3% last year at Ottawa Public Health. You only got 2%. And that's
I'm not getting into that. I'm getting in why it's a differing amount between the services, not what people got last year or this year.
Because police are self-contained. They have their own levy. Transit is self-contained. It has its own levy. Everybody else is on citywide.
And final question. So this is a recommendation to police. Police could come back and ask for 4 or 6 or what have you, correct?
This is, council directs or provides this to the board, and they provide the direction to the police. There is a process, as you know, if the police come in and they don't actually adhere to the recommendations that City Council has provided to them.
Okay, and very quick housekeeping question. For the consultations, the councillor-led consultations, I'm assuming it's the same rules as before. You need to have more than one councillor involved in organizing a consultation in order to have staff to be present on site. Is that correct?
That is our preference.
Okay, thank you.
Great, that's a good question. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard, he left. Councillor Blais, and then Councillor Meehan.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up on Councillor Eglei's questions, with the 6.4 in transit, if that was staying at our preview of 3 per our plans, would there be room to increase the elements that are only getting 2% and still stay within the 3% target?
If you left the 9.8 million on the citywide levy instead, no, they'd still only get 2%. Okay. Because first thing we do, your direction was increase your contribution to capital by 9.8 million. So that comes off first, everybody else gets 2%.
Okay. And so, but we would have $9.8 million available to do other capital investments across the city.
That's correct, but you would then leave your transit, because transit would be at 3%.
100%.
They would have a hole in their capital program.
And would that put a hole in the LRT capital program, or would that be bus refurbishments and other?
That ultimately would put a hole in your LRT.
Okay. If I recall correctly, the transit levy appears as a separate line on the physical tax bill itself. Is that still the case?
The transit levy is a separate, because we have actually 3 transit levies.
Oh, of course. And are we able to separate it to show the 3% the city wants to charge and then the 3.4% Doug Ford wants to charge on the bill itself?
Unfortunately, the Municipal Act actually dictates about the presentation of things on the tax bill. I think the mayor will remember when we tried to change it back in, I think, 1998, and the province didn't take that too well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Meehan, please, followed by Councillor Harder.
On? There it is. It cuts out a little bit. First of all, to say I'm really grateful that a portion of the $57 million gas tax money has made its way into budget directions. I don't want to speak for Councillor McKenney, but we put that motion forward in April, and I think it makes a lot of sense to direct a portion of that to our roads, infrastructure, and transportation. So we're glad to see that in budget directions. And I apologize if the answer to this question, I've missed it because the audio back here is pretty bad, but it has to do with the 6.4% transit, the proposed transit levy. Our budget this year was set at 3%, which was 1% higher than we had in previous years, and we sold that to the taxpayers as necessary money to fill the infrastructure funding gap. And I'm just wondering now, that extra room that we've got, is that money now going to fill the transit deficit? I'm just trying to figure out how this works, what it means.
Ultimately, Councillor, that is a fairly accurate portrayal of it. It was really 2% last year, and then more or less 1% to fill your infrastructure gap on the citywide side. Now it's really 2% and 1% to fill the infrastructure gap on the transit side, to replace funds that we are not going to get from the province.
And is that, how much would that be? I mean, you said 1%, it translates into $18 million?
$16 million.
$16 million. So is that an accurate reflection of the deficit, the transit deficit we're facing?
We're giving them $9.8 million, but if you look overall across all of the areas, including police, who have an increase in their contribution to capital built in theirs, and what we have on the citywide side, even as part of the 2%, we actually have also inflation built in on, as Isabel said, and construction inflation is running a bit crazy these days, so we have that built in. So overall, you're probably getting about $16 million in total increasing to capital across the city. But the biggest piece, the 9.8, is going into the transit reserve.
The transit reserve, okay. So 6.4%, what is that going to represent on the tax bill then?
Overall, the tax bill is only increasing by 3%. So,
but I'm talking about, but separate from that is the transit levy.
That is, the transit levy is on the tax bill.
Yes.
Okay, and the transit levy, the citywide levy, and the police levy combined, the bottom line for a taxpayer is a 3% increase. It just happens to be different in between each of those various levies. So, for example, the citywide levy in your area would be going up by $49. The police levy would be going up by $18, and the transit levy would be going up by $42. Combined, that's a $109 increase, and that average taxpayer was paying $3,672 last year, so that $109 represents a bottom line 3% increase.
Okay. So are we expecting, looking at the figures that, as you understand them, is this going to be carrying over into 2020, 2021?
The plan that we have put forward actually sees a portion of that 9.8 going to transit each and every year in this term to try to recoup what we would have received from the provincial government if they in fact had doubled the gas tax. They were going to, their gas taxes I think is at $36 million a year. So we were eventually going to go to $72 million, which we are not. So we need to fill that hole, and this plan over time fills that hole for you.
I guess we've learned our lesson. Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's it for now.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Meehan. Councillor Harder, please, followed by Councillor Leeper.
Hi. On Thursday at Planning Committee, we have the annual development report, and one of the things in there talks about how well we're doing as a city, and certainly that the average home has increased in value from today's figure to $409,000. So we all know that MPAC has to find their way to revisiting the values, et cetera, et cetera. And from speaking with Wendy Stephenson, she said they are getting faster at it. But do we have any idea of the delta between, that we're missing for the very significant retail market that we have, for the very significant growth we have, where, for example, we're not getting taxes in cases for up to 3 years on brand new move-ins, right? Or in the case where a home has gone up to $409,000, I forget what the previous number was. I'm not sure if anybody remembers, 370 or something like that. But that seems to me like a significant amount of money that we're not capturing, that we're not basing our taxes on. So I'm wondering, is there, one, do we have any idea what that looks like in the amount? But also, do we have any thought that maybe that's something of the province that we could be asking for their initiative to, you know, quicken the process for MPAC?
That's a really good suggestion, Councillor, because as you know, the province is undertaking a review of MPAC and how they're doing in terms of timeliness and accuracy and all of these things that impact us greatly. We actually don't know how much we're missing. We haven't yet figured out a way to capture, go from issuing a building permit to when it should show up on our supplementary tax roll and what kind of taxes that would generate. So we're working to try to find a way to estimate that. We can go back 3 years when we get a property added onto the tax roll. If it has been occupied for the past 3 years, we can actually send a tax bill that is for the past 3 years, and we do that. But unfortunately, we just don't know how much is missing from what MPAC is providing every year.
Is there any way, like, I mean, I would think that it would be an investment in, if there was a body or an organization that would have that kind of intel that we could contract with to do that kind of a work, because I think it could be a significant amount of money. And I know, for example, and then I'm not even talking about the commercial side of it, for a city gate, for example, where a lot of the businesses in there are not paying what they should be. They're paying for a tax on the land, but not on the business itself. It can take Canada North and Councillor Sudd's area and what's, you know, the advancements there and the interest in investing in Ottawa. I mean, I would like to explore maybe a direction to you that we look for a company or someone with the expertise to actually do that kind of analysis to see whether it's worthwhile for us to look to the province in a totally different way, just to say, help us stay up to date.
I will have that discussion with Ms. Stephenson. Her and I have talked about this in the past, and we'll continue and see if there is an opportunity to find some company or some system that will actually allow us to sort of get ahead in knowing what should be on the tax rolls when they're returned every year.
Because it could even be just a system, an IT system that captures it, and we could actually, if we can create that, it would be innovative and probably very marketable, and other people would want to purchase this from us. So it could be like a business proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leeper, then Councillor Fleury. That's good. Maybe, Councillor, do you want to come up to where Councillor Fleury is? Councillor Leeper, then Fleury, Kavanaugh, and Hubley.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mayor. A couple of questions with respect to the budget directions. The first of which is the inflation rate. As far as I can tell, the inflation for August year over year for the Ottawa portion of the Ontario CMA was 2.1%. Is that roughly accurate?
That's correct.
We share the same. And at one point in the last year or so, that inflation rate spiked up as high as 3%?
I don't remember that, but you could be right.
Okay. What are the forecasters talking about with respect to the inflation rate?
Actually, inflation overall is at around 2%, so the forecasts are around 2%. The only difference that we have is that your consumer price index and your construction price index are considerably different, and construction is significantly higher.
And that leads exactly to my next question, which is how closely municipal inflation tracks with the basket of goods that's in CPI. How closely does it track? What is our inflation rate?
I don't know what our inflation rate is overall. It varies. A big chunk of what we provide is construction. Capital projects, and we know from experience that we're seeing just now is that inflation is running well over 6%, sometimes up to 10% on projects. So Mr. Gontier is trying to deal with that as best as he can to try to advance your 2019 capital project budget, but he's facing significant challenges right now with respect to that.
What's driving that construction inflation?
There's a number of things that drive construction inflation. One of the biggest things is, and we're partly responsible for it, is the amount of work that's out there. There's only so many companies here in Ottawa, and construction companies in Toronto don't tend to bid on construction projects in Ottawa. Okay. So you only have so much capacity here, and when we prime the pump and throw out more capital work out there, what you see is that the construction community reacts to it and the prices go up. So the supply is less than the demand, so the prices adjust accordingly.
Yep. So there's skilled labor that is still needed in our market in order to be able to find some better equilibrium. I think international prices on some of the materials that we purchase are also going up.
Tariffs are another big impact. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yes, the uncertainty with China and the steel tariffs and all of those things are having an impact on the direct inputs into construction contracts as well.
I know Councillor Menard was asking me earlier whether there is a published municipal inflation rate. I think there used to be, but StatsCan is no longer collecting that.
Stats Canada never published a municipal price index. Okay. We at the City of Ottawa had developed one. And then as a result of an audit, it was determined that we would no longer do that. Okay. And so we have not.
The growth assessment, I think last year growth assessment was what, 1.3%?
1.5 actually.
1.5, and
we moved it up from 1.3 to 1.5 last year.
It was in that range through the previous term of council. How did that track to the increased expenses that the city incurred as a result of growth?
The overall, the problem with comparing how much you get in increased assessment versus your cost of growth is that your costs of growth are kind of lumpy. They don't go up. You don't build a quarter of a fire station if you get a 0.25% increase in the growth in the area. These things come in yep. sort of higher sort of lumpy bits. So overall, they're tracking fairly close over time, but in any one year, you can have a significant difference if you bring on a big piece of infrastructure that represents years and years of accumulation of growth.
I'm just wondering what portion of the increase in the city's expenses is due to the fact that the city is growing.
I don't have that at this point in time. I'll be able to tell you that when we table the budget, because at that point, all of the growth costs will be calculated.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing that. One of the frequent questions that we get as councillors is around the difference in the taxation rate between some other jurisdictions and ourselves, where the residential tax rate in Ottawa is higher than jurisdictions like Toronto. We've spoken about this frequently. The larger commercial industrial tax base in some of those jurisdictions plays a big role. The commercial industrial tax base in Toronto plays more of the freight that the city needs to pay. how have we been tracking over the past, say, 4 years or 8 years with respect to the respective amount of our budget that is paid for from the residential versus the commercial industrial tax base?
So I'm going to start off this because this is a constant bugaboo that I hear. You can't compare tax rates.
Okay.
So Toronto has a lower tax rate than us. The average price of a home in Toronto is over $1 million. So multiply a lower tax rate by a higher assessment, and what do you get? The same taxation.
Yep.
If I look at actual dollars, the City of Ottawa is now in the mid-range in terms of municipalities in Ontario with respect to taxation. We are not at the high end anymore. Your Oakvilles, your Mississaugas, your Vaughns, those are the municipalities that are at the top, and parts of Toronto, of course. So the comparison of tax rates is just is not a good way to look at total taxation. With respect to what municipalities are split between residential and commercial, it has been staying, in terms of total dollars, it's actually been staying fairly constant.
Okay.
The problem, though, is that the assessment values in commercial have been dropping. So their value has been dropping, but their taxation has been staying the same. So this is something I believe council needs to look at when you have your next reassessment, which I believe is going to be in 2021, is for implementation, I think, in 22.
Okay.
Whether, in fact, you want to continue with your policy of having neutral tax ratios, which means if their assessment drops, it doesn't matter, we just increase the ratio so that they end up paying the same taxes.
Right.
So that's my rant.
No, and I appreciate it's valuable. I mean, I think one of the things that I hear from what you're saying is we can't just jump immediately to the conclusion that we are overtaxed because of the difference in tax rates between ourselves and some other jurisdictions.
And Councillor, you and I have had this discussion as well. I would remind you that Toronto has $800 million a year from land transfer tax built into their budget.
Yep.
That if they didn't have that, they would have a 4 or 5% tax increase overnight.
Fantastic. Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Fleury.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. My question is not the specifics, but as part of the direction, there was the proposed priority for the term of council. I just want to understand how, at this point, what sort of feedback are we looking, and what's the opportunity for engagement on that? So it's more of a procedural question.
Yeah, we're actually going to do the strategic plan under Mr. Kanalakis' presentation right after this item. So we'll come back to that. Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh and Hubley.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask, and this is more kind of questions for Mr. Manconi as well, in terms of the 2.5% increase in transit fare, notwithstanding the fact that we're going to have a new LRT system. People are going to be discouraged still from using the transit system. Therefore, ridership will go down, and therefore revenue will be going down in terms of ridership. Do we have statistics on the drop in ridership that we've experienced? And if we can get those metrics, that would be very helpful. The other metrics that we need, and this is again for Mr. Manconi, perhaps we can talk about this at the Transit Commission, is on the buses that have been late or missed buses. I think it would be really important to see the statistics on that so that we can see the improvements that we're supposed to see once the LRT is starting. But right now, it's going to be hard to convince people to pay that extra 2.5% when they are quite discouraged from the service they've received, especially this past winter. So I think we're going to need that information. As well, one of the things that I'm concerned about is the Equipass and low-income passes. Can you give me the figures about how much that represents in terms of a cost? Because the 2.5% on those people that are on fixed incomes, low incomes, is quite a burden. And if we can get numbers on preventing that cost increase for that population, that would be very helpful.
If you could take
So-
note of that, Mr. Manconi, and get back to Councillor Kavanaugh.
Certainly.
I just remind members that, yes, their passengers, OC Transport, paying 2.5% more, but they're getting a $2.1 billion LRT system, plus significant new service in hard hit areas that have witnessed delays and cancellations and so on, and those come into effect in October. And that's, I believe, a $5 million investment, Mr. Manconi?
Correct.
So, you know, I think in fairness, yes, fares are going up, but service is going up as well with LRT and with these $5 million in routes. Thanks, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Hubely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that clarification too, because I think it is important to realize that we are making significant investments in the transit. So it troubles me as not just the transit chair, but as a councillor, that some would want to start looking at taking away from that service in order to keep that levy lower. My question to the treasurer is, we're talking a lot today about the change in the gas tax revenue from the province. I'm trying to piece together how that got into the budget. Because we see in 2016 there was an announcement by the provincial government of that day talking about the Gardiner Expressway, I think, and that they were going to use increase the gas tax across the province to avoid putting tolls on the Gardiner. It was supposed to kick in 2019, but correct me if I'm wrong, it never showed up in the 2019 provincial budget from the previous government. So they didn't come through with that promise at that time. Is that correct?
That's correct, but what happened when they announced that was we have a 30-year plan. We built that increase into the plan, and that you use that information as a basis for your decision-making going forward with respect to stage 2 of LRT.
Right. So my concern, Madam Treasurer, and this is more a comment than something you're going to answer. Earlier we heard this referenced as a charge that Doug Ford wants to charge us. I have trouble with that because that's blaming Ford government for mismanagement of the previous government on a financial basis. And as you confirmed for me just now, that money was not in the 2019 budget as promised. Therefore, it was basically a check that was written that bounced. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry. Councillor Luloff, please. Sorry, gentlemen.
And just a quick point to why stage 1 is going to make such a difference. I've got an OC Transpo bus driver in my ward who was listening and just sent me an email to say that in a snowstorm, even when we had a full transitway, I'd be able to get from the Mac King Bridge to Orleans and complete a local part of the route faster than I could get from Le Breton to the Mackenzie King Bridge. A stalled car or a bus or anything in the bus lane just causes complete chaos. We are getting extreme value for our money with Phase 1, and I look forward to the implementation of Phase 2 as well.
Great, it's a good point. We got to get that picture out of all those buses bumper to bumper on the Mackenzie Bridge. You know, they go for half a kilometer.
We used to say that it's the place where dreams go to die. Yeah.
Thank you. So on the staff recommendation, carried. Now, Mr. Kanellakis, you have the floor. This is, as Councillor Fleury raised, I don't know, is Councillor Fleury here? Yeah. Oh, they are right in front of me. So this is the opportunity now for Mr. Kanellakis to give us his proposal with respect to our priorities as a council. So this is item 13, proposed process for the 2019-2022 term of council priorities. And then, as you know, we have three other items from Councillor Kavanaugh, Councillor Suds, and Councillor Harder. So,
Thank you.
Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start by also acknowledging a few people. First of all, today is the first day at FEDCO of our new general manager of Innovative Client Services, Valerie Turner, who's over at the side. So I'd like to welcome her to our first FEDCO meeting. I'd also like to acknowledge that David White is officially our city solicitor now, that in accordance with the memo I had sent out a week ago. Rick O'Connor is officially the city clerk, and that's his role. And Marion Simulik is our CFO treasurer until her retirement at the end of this year. So the department that Donna Gray and Marion were leading is now under the auspices of Valerie. I also would like to thank, for this presentation, the work that we've done that I want to tell you about. It's about a 5-minute presentation. I want to thank Donna Gray, who's moved over to Community and Social Services. But Donna, when she was in the former Department of Service Innovation and Performance Development, led the initiative and created the framework for this strategic plan. I'd also like to thank Mark Rennie-Decotre, who's with me here, who's the Director in Service Transformation, Kendall Gibbon, who's worked on, and Sami Qureshi, who's also here somewhere. I think he's in the back. These were key people who put a lot of effort into the framework and the development of this proposal. This report is connected to the draft 2019-2022 term of council priorities. We're seeking the approval for the approach and timeline for the standing committees and council to consider these priorities. I want to emphasize that this is not the staff priorities. This is not the staff strategic plan. The staff have done the advance work to give council a framework to discuss your priorities in conjunction with the budget for your term of council that you've been elected for. So this ultimately is your strategic plan, and you can make changes and do whatever you want with it. This is our best foot forward in terms of the work we've done to try and capture, as I'll explain in a few minutes, the priorities that we believe the council should be considering for this term of council. But it's yours, and you will be directing staff and monitoring staff in terms of how we develop and how we implement these priorities. Just as a way of background, in May of 2011, Council adopted the corporate planning framework, which outlined the best practices for strategic planning and the performance measurement tools to make sure that we're more strategy driven. This framework supports setting strategic priorities for each term of council, ensuring that our programs and services address the changing needs of the community. So the mayor, standing committees, and transit commission oversee the priorities on behalf of council, monitor our performance, and provide appropriate direction to staff. And we report out twice a term under that framework in terms of how we're doing against the strategic plan to the appropriate standing committee. So in line with the previous planning exercises, we prepared the draft priorities. You can change the slide, keep on going. We prepared the priorities based on the following. In preparation, the senior leadership team we started work actually in early 2018 on this, so we've been at it for 15 months, and we grouped it around 3 themes: our city, our services, and our people. The first planning session happened in March of 2018. We did 12 planning sessions. We consulted with a variety of people, and we tried to strike a balance between spending on existing core services and investing for the future. Growing population of Ottawa, the impact of climate change, competition for economic investment, investing in our workforce to meet our growing service needs and expectations. We also talked to department staff who provided their input. We also looked at and talked to external subject matter experts, people like Joe Berridge, who's a world-class urban planner and city builder, William Eggers, who is Executive Director at the Center for Government Insights in Deloitte, Washington, in terms of best practices for service delivery, Ian Culwick, a partner with Mercer, to look at how do we deal with the trends and issues facing our workforce. And we divided the plan into really 3 roles of the city: take actions, which is where the city leads in achieving the priority outcomes, and 33 of the actions have been identified in terms of the city leading these actions. Collaborate directly with other strategic stakeholders. There's currently 8 actions under collaboration, and how do we support and indirectly help others to achieve priority outcomes, and there's 8 actions there. The process was informed by the work that was led by Steve Willis and his department, Ottawa Next, Beyond 2036, which went to Planning Committee on February 14th. That was a big piece of work that we've used to incorporate into our strategic plan. We also followed very closely the 2018 municipal elections and all the campaign literature and your platforms and all the positions that councillors have took when they were running for re-election. And we actually put all those up on the wall and looked at what were the common themes across all of council that we needed to consider that should be in the strategic plan, because ultimately this is a report card on council at the end of your term in terms of what you promised to your constituents to have achieved. We also looked at the priorities from the 2015 to 2018 last term of council that extended into this term, such as LRT, affordable housing, reducing GHG emissions, and improving access to city services through through digital service delivery. So the proposed priorities, as I said, are around our city, our people, and our services. And with respect to our city, we want to make sure we encourage economic growth and diversification. We want to support business investment and expansion, talent attraction and retention, and branding Ottawa, as you've noticed, as the place to be. We want to make sure we have effective mobility through a sustainable, accessible, and connected transportation system, promote safety, culture, and social and physical well-being for our residents, grow and protect a healthy, beautiful, and vibrant city that can adapt to change. With respect to our services, we want to deliver innovative services that continuously improve to meet the needs of our residents and invest in sustainable infrastructure to meet future growth and service needs. With respect to our people, we want to promote service excellence by supporting our workforce that is a healthy, diverse, adapted, and engaged. And we're spending a lot of effort on that because I truly believe that the only way you can improve service is investing in your people. Good service comes through your people. The go-forward approach, as you saw in the report, is the draft priorities would be considered. Kendall, you could have moved the slides. Kendall's having trouble keeping up with me. The draft priorities will be considered with the draft 2020 budget process. Councillors, and I know Councillor Fleury might have some questions on this, would consult with residents on the draft priorities during their ward budget consultations. The draft priorities with the financials attached to them are going to be tabled in the draft budget in November when you receive the draft budget. And along with the draft priorities, you'll also receive the closeout report from the last term of council priorities, so you can see where we progressed on many of these initiatives. Each standing committee, after the budget is tabled in November, as part of the budget review process, will consider the portion of the priorities that falls within its terms of reference and hear from public delegations during the month of November as we go into December. And then council would approve the priorities, can make changes to the priorities, amend the priorities when it approves the budget in 2020. So, Mr. Mayor, that is the process in terms of working our way through the strategic plan and linking the strategic plan to the budget that's going to be tabled in November. Thank you.
Okay, so we have one member of the public who would like to speak to this, Alex Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm here representing the Federation of Citizens Associations. You folks will know that the FCA is an umbrella group representing 49 community associations across the city. And the term of council priorities clearly is an issue that interests our members. In general, we support the thrust of the term of council priorities, but there are some issues that we have in previous budget submissions have commented on that are part of this. And if I could ask for you to put up, I think it was that package, you have a different package there, the attachments, the PowerPoint presentation? Slide 16, please.
Oh, you're on the actual strategic
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah.
We don't have that one.
Okay, never mind. All right, so Mr. Mayor, it would have been helpful, but I'll refer to the item in particular. That strategic plan speaks of updating the transportation master plan, that's the one, transportation master plan to define the policies, projects, and other actions that will support a connected and sustainable transportation network. This involves, of course, walking, cycling, transit, and roads. The city's transportation master plan now encourages increasing modal share for walking, cycling, and transit. Why do we want those investments? Because they are efficient, they are environmentally friendly, and more economical to the taxpayer as opposed to building and paying for additional road capacity for more and more cars. So that's why we want to increase transit ridership. As you know, the past few years, we've had problems with increasing transit ridership. The FCA, in the past 3 budgets, has come forward to Transit Commission and asked for the development of a transit fare strategy that will maximize transit ridership to meet the city's TNP goals. We should have that strategy. That way we would know that the decisions we're making with respect to fares is in not only helps pay for the system, but also will serve to help increase ridership, because without the ridership, this enormous investment we're making is for naught. The other element that's in the report speaks of implement mobility safety initiatives to enhance the safety of vulnerable road users like pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. We've had a lot of controversy in the community about what's happening on our streets, the tragedies that we're encountering on our streets, a lot of discussion about Vision Zero. 3 times we have come to Transportation Committee and asked for the development of a Vision Zero program. The time is now. Let's see what it takes to make our streets safer and get on with the program. The last element that I want to bring to your attention is on slide 17, where the report says, work collaboratively with each ward councillor to identify sites for the installation of temporary traffic calming measures. For the past 3 years, the FCA has come forward at budget time to ask for more funding for traffic calming measures. What happened in the last budget was not more funding, but a shift towards helping councillors deal with temporary local traffic calming measures. That's nice, but that's not more funding, and that does not help us address the needs in our communities to make our streets safer for the people who live there. So these are 3 items that we would like to see some tangible action on that you've listed in your 2019-2022 term of council priorities. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, so questions and comments to staff. Just for clarification, though, on what was just said, there was an increase in funding traffic calming by $230,000 because each member of council got an additional $10,000, 40. Councillor Harder.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, and it's always interesting to talk about this and where we go and how we get there. I'm just wondering, because we are undertaking and we're in the middle of almost the official plan, a totally new official plan, not just a redo, are these 2 going to collide? How do we know that, because we're going to be going into a big part of public consultation. You know, we've got our outline that we've tabled now at Planning Committee up until December. We know we'll have another joint meeting then, and I'm just wondering if this is not dispositioning ourselves into a place that it may not meet the official plan. Any concerns at all, Mr. Willis, on that?
So no, Mr. Mayor, we're not particularly concerned at all. As a matter of fact, as Mr. Kanalasic has indicated, the pre-work we did on the official plan, the Beyond 2036, was a major input into this process to begin with, and we consulted quite broadly on that process. So I think we're going to hear a lot of the same issues come up through the process, and I think many of the things we're doing in the OP in this plan are highly aligned.
So it's probably a bigger concern or a bigger opportunity for the more visionary thinking beyond this time frame.
So, Mr. Mayor, just understand the 2 plans and their different roles. So the Beyond 2036, the official plan, are the 25-year horizon, where while we do it, we're thinking about 100 years worth of change in the city. This is very focused to the next term and probably a bit beyond that, understanding what this council does, setting the stage for the following council. So they're different time horizons, but they're absolutely can dovetail together. You know, being ambitious is something that based on our capacity to deliver, doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. It just may mean how long it takes us to get there. So as I said, we're not particularly worried and see a high degree of alignment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Conseil Fleury.
Merci, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to preface my comments by understanding the process. So you're in front of us with your best estimate of the various elements that are moving around and were being worked on by individual councillors or newly elected officials. That's clear. When is the best time for individual councillors or council to discuss this at length? Because my initial feedback would be that they're all great elements, but they're elements that are very high level, and then there's very focused ones. And to me, it's almost imbalanced. Like, I struggle with providing constructive feedback on that basis, because I could turn to one page and say, well, what are the targets of that? And I could turn to the other page and say, okay, well, that's a clear target. So I would love for me to understand when's the best time to engage, how, and is it today at FEDCO, or is there a window of opportunity ahead of council approval?
Mr. Mayor, today is just setting the context and the process. What Councillor Fleury is saying is correct. What we're bringing back at when we table the budget are going to be performance outcomes for the various actions, and we are going to be bringing back, based on what Council approves as a financial framework, the allotments that we believe can be attributed and allocated to the various initiatives based on a very different approach this term of council compared to the last term of council on the strategic plan. If you recall, the last term of council, we had something called strategic initiatives, where we had the benefit of the uploading of the municipal funds expenses to the province, something that Mayor Watson was actually engaged in when he was at the province. And we benefited hugely for that, and we had room for council to be able to invest in strategic priorities. That upload is finished, so we have to deal within the pot of financial framework, whatever council approves now, to allocate to these particular strategic priorities, which will impact the speed and the extent to which you can move these things forward. Your opportunity to discuss them are at several levels. Number one, when you go out to either your individual community meetings with the various stakeholders, you can have that discussion, seek input, and we can support you on that. Or when you have the regional, we're going to have the traditional regional group of councillors getting together around the city, you can discuss it there. At FEDCO, or at each committee, starting with today at FEDCO, you're going to also be discussing your strategic priorities in the context of approving the budget and what numbers are associated to the actions. So you will be able to have a discussion about, I don't think there's enough in this particular priority versus something else. The last thing I'll say about it is that the strategic plan is very much at a higher level, because unlike the last plan, we had 400 and some initiatives, and it became totally overwhelming, I think, for staff and for council to keep track on truly what was important, because what we ended up doing was lifting all the individual work plan action items from departments into the strategic plan, because everybody wanted to see it there, because they thought it wouldn't get done if it wasn't a strategic plan. The difference this time is that the broader priorities capture the action plans, which are rolled down into the departments as work plans. So every department is now going to have a work plan that links right back to these strategic priorities, and their base budgets, capital budgets, and all the other budgets, that funding sources they have, will be allocated to the actions that contribute back to the strategic plan. And you'll see that as we roll that out during 2020.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to clarify though, so if I were to have a series of specific discussions relating mobility, relating to housing, relating to transit, that will come as part of the budget debates of those committees?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sudds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to just express my thanks for what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is a tremendous amount of work that goes into producing this plan for us, and I appreciate the expertise and the attention to it. I love a good plan, and I think the framework that you've presented here, in my mind, is it resonates. So I'm seeing a theme here, whether it's around economic growth and diversification, environmental stewardship, transportation, and the fourth around thriving communities. And the theme that I see there, you've really highlighted in your feature around our services. And so service excellence through innovation, to me, is the common thread that goes through all of these. And as we proceed, obviously, with our budget discussions, I think we should be cognizant of that thread and making sure that we provide the funding that's needed to make sure we can innovate as we look at all four of these streams. The other comment I wanted to share around our services, the document outlines our services are designed using innovative approaches, which again resonates. I would take that a step forward, that our services are designed and provided using innovative approaches. I think it's not enough to just design them, but we need to look at how we provide those services to our community as well. My question really is around, we see today the slides and the report that came to council. Is there a master document, so to speak, that will be shared with us? I know you referenced in the last term of council there was 400 and some odd priorities. This is a tighter group, but is there a document that we will be able to refer to and comb through beyond what's shared today?
Yes, we have, there's actually two documents. There's the document and the closeout report that you'll be receiving from the previous term of council, which basically transitions into this plan. And then the actual strategic plan is the attachment that there's about 21 pages, which has each one of the priorities and the specific actions related to the priorities in the three buckets of action, collaboration, support. And so you see it. The thing that's missing from it right now are the financials and the performance measures, which are the piece that we're going to bring once council sets its budget directions report. We will then be able to allocate from the various sources what we're going to fund, what we recommend will be funded in those areas, and that would be up for discussion by the committee chairs, committees, and then ultimately council.
So will it be presented to us in such a way that we see how it's allocated through these four priorities? Yes? Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saad. Another question to our staff? So on item 13, we have to approve and receive. Item 1 to approve the recommended approach, and item 2 to receive the draft 2019-22 term of council priority. On the item, carry and receive. Thank you very much. And now we go to verbal update, women and gender equity. Councillor Kavanagh, Chair, and is Councillor Kavanagh still here? You might want to move to the center.
Sorry about that. I was distracted
okay.
by the smell of fries.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the introduction. As the Council Liaison on Women and Gender Equity, it's my pleasure to update members of KEDCO and members of the public on the progress to develop the city's Women and Gender Equity Strategy. The Women and Gender Equity Strategy, WGES, and my role as liaison were launched on March 8th, 2019 during our International Women's Day breakfast here at City Hall. Okay, sorry about that. I'll get closer to the mic. Since then, a councillor sponsorship group was formed to support and guide this work. Members of the council sponsors group include the mayor, CPSC Chair Suds, Councillor Deans and McKenney, and members of senior management. The following are the steps taken towards the development of WGES so far. The city has hired Ms. Swassan Al-Rafi as the new specialist for women and gender equity to support the development and implementation of the strategy and to support the sponsors group. Equity and inclusion lens training with a focus on gender equity for all members of council has been planned. All members of council and their staff were invited by Mayor Watson and myself to attend the training later this month. The city's senior management team has already received the training. A gender lens is being developed as a tool for use by council and staff to better inform our decision-making. A series of focus groups with city staff and equity-seeking community groups were held to solicit feedback on WGES priorities in anticipation of the public forum to be held September 30th, 2019. Preparations are underway for the Women and Gender Equity Strategy Public Forum on September 30th at Jean Piggott Hall. All members of council recently received a save the date from me. The event will include speeches and a facilitated consultation activity in order to solicit feedback to inform the development of the Women and Gender Equity Strategy. Registration for the event will be through an on-link that will be launched at the site ottawa.ca on September 13th. Council members, city stakeholders, and community partners are invited to share the registration link with their networks. You will receive the link on Friday. The Engage Ottawa tool is also available for Ottawa residents who cannot attend the forum but wish to participate. The tool will also be launched online on September 13th. Please do not hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or require any further information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Any question to Councillor Kavanagh? Okay, we go now to Open City Network Council appointment. Councillor Suds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I have a motion to table here today. Just as a bit of background, I think I've shared with some of you. I've been asked to join the inaugural board of directors for the Open City Networks. This is a new non-for-profit that has just established that is looking at developing free public digital infrastructure, as well as some work around the creation of common data standards across the country. So some really exciting work that I look forward to contributing to. So I'll read the motion here. That the following motion be added to the agenda for today's meeting pursuant to subsection 89(3) of the procedure bylaw due to the next board meeting taking place prior to the next committee meeting. Whereas Councillor Suds has been approached by the Open City Network, OCN, to serve on the board of directors, and whereas OCN's mandate agrees with that of the ITS subcommittee, which is to investigate information technology products and services, including initiatives that stem from the Smart City Strategy, to provide improved access to city services by the public, enhance connectivity throughout the city, and an economy that is strengthened by leveraging available and emerging technologies and products. And whereas the Open City Network's mandate aligns with the city's Smart City Strategy and further supports innovative and new approaches to city services that allow the needs of individuals and communities to be proactive. Whereas the Canada North Technology Park is the largest technology park in Canada, contributing over $13 billion to Canada's GDP, with over 500 companies, many of whom are leading in the development and application of smart city technologies. The mandate of the Open City Network, in particular the development of digital public infrastructure, leveraging data standards, is of interest to the city. Whereas the costs associated with the travel required of the position, which is consistent with the 2010-2014 Council Midterm Governance Review, Council member representatives are funded out of the Administrative Services budget as approved by Council. And whereas Council members who undertake city-funded travel must submit a report detailing their experiences, what they learned, and how the city's positions or interests are advanced. Therefore, be it resolved that the Finance and Economic Development Committee recommend Council appoint Councillor Jenna Suds to serve on the Board of Directors, Open City Network, for the 2018-2020 term of Council. Be it further resolved that Finance and Economic Development Committee requests Council suspend the rules of procedure to consider this motion at the meeting of September 11th, 2019. Thank you.
Great. That's a good initiative. Does anyone have any questions to Councillor Suds? Councillor El-Shantiri?
I'll be happy to carry that, but I just want to add, when we received the information from Councillor Suds, she has cleared that motion with the Integrity Commissioner, so I think we're all good with this.
Right. So on the motion, carried, and this will go to Council tomorrow. Next, Rideau Corridor Landscape Strategy. Councillor Harder, please.
Okay, thank you. So we waive the rules to add the Rideau Corridor Landscape Strategy on today's FEDCO agenda due to the fact that confirmation is required by the end of September 2019. Back in 2010, Parks Canada formally created the Rideau Corridor Landscape Strategy, since the Rideau Corridor Landscape Strategy is led by a steering committee composed of representatives from municipalities along the Rideau River Corridor and other parties with an influence on planning and development along the corridor, including Parks Canada, National Capital Commission, Province of Ontario, First Nations, and conservation authorities. And whereas the City of Ottawa appoints one urban representative and one rural representative to the Rideau Corridor Landscape Strategy Steering Committee, we support Councillors George Deroux and Riley Brockington, who both have agreed to serve as the rural and urban representative. And whereas Parks Canada has requested confirmation of the City of Ottawa's representatives by the end of September 2019, therefore be it resolved that FEDCO recommend the Council appoint Councillors Deroux and Brockington as the City of Ottawa's representatives on the Rideau Corridor Landscape Strategy Steering Committee for the 2018 to 2022 term of council.
Okay, any questions or comments?
I know he's not here. I just want to make sure that Councillor Deroux realizes there's two sides to the river.
And the canal. On the
Yes, I
motion,
know.
carried.
Concerning.
Carried. Notice the motion for consideration at subsequent meeting. Avis de motion. Any written inquiries? Adjournment. Carried. Next meeting, Tuesday, October 1st. La prochaine réunion, le 1er octobre 2019. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.